Mm. Hey, thanks for hopping on the call. Yeah, it's good to see you. It's been forever. Yeah. So I got your text the other day and I've been thinking about it ever since. It sounds like you're exactly where I was at a few years ago. You're frustrated. You know that the career path you're on right now is not it. It's not for you. But you don't know which lane to switch to. You don't know what you should do instead. That's actually why I wanted to hop on this call with you. I have an idea. I know it's the complete opposite of what you've been doing, but I actually think you should become a web developer or a programmer or, learn to code. Yeah, I'm serious. No, I'm not joking. I think you can do it. I think you should do it. I think you need to do it. Yeah. So I actually work for this company. We're always hiring new developers, new programmers, and I'm pretty sure I could get my boss to let you shadow me. And run through my next few projects with me. You'll pick up all the skills you would need from scratch. And that way, at the end of that training session, even if my company isn't hiring, even if my boss isn't looking to bring on anyone new, you can just take all those skills you learned and go apply for a few jobs elsewhere. Yeah. I know you could do it. I think you should do it. You're worried that it's going to take too much time, or how much of a time commitment is it? Good question. So I don't think you need to go to one of those 500-hour coding boot camps. That works for a lot of people, but I don't think it needs to be something that's that much of a time commitment. I think if I'm showing you step by step the core skills that I think you should learn, it's going to be a lot faster than that. I think you'll be able to find time for this throughout your weeks. Trust me. Yeah, I mean, it's not about getting the highest paying programming job as your first job. That can come later. Right now, it's just about getting your foot in the door, right? Like getting your first job and then learning on someone else's dime, right? I'm going to teach you these core set of skills that you can apply for jobs with, get the job, and then learn the next higher set of skills once you're already hired. Yes, exactly. It's about getting your foot in the door, learning on someone else's dime, and just going from there. For sure. You're going to crush it. You're going to do amazing. Yeah. You're worried that you're not smart enough? Let me tell you right now, programming is not an intellectual challenge. It's an emotional challenge. What I mean by that is, as long as you don't give up, as long as you resist the emotional urge to quit, you'll be fine. I'm living proof. I'm a very slow learner. I've never learned something fast or easily in my life. I always feel like it's a struggle for me to learn a new idea, and I'm doing just great in programming. So if I can do it, you can do it. You've always been way smarter and sharper than me. Yeah. You can do it, trust me. Cool. So you want to do it, but you're not sure how to get started. Well, that's the beauty of this plan, right? You don't need to worry at all about what we're going to do or how to get started. That's what I'm here for. You're going to shadow me on a few of my upcoming projects. I'm going to show you bit by bit, step by step, what I think you should focus on. Yes, exactly. So I don't want you to worry about how or what we're doing. I want you to worry and spend all of your brain's horsepower on why we're doing what we're doing. The why behind what we're doing is how you build your mental model and the puzzle pieces of how all the different technologies fit together. So that's your job, just understanding why we're doing what we're doing. Yes, exactly. I'm really excited for you. I think this is going to be awesome. I think you're going to crush it. Yeah. When can you get started? I think you should get started today, right now. Yeah. I mean, what time is it? Yeah. I'm going to take like a 5 or 10 minute coffee break, but what are you doing after this call? Perfect. Yes. Okay, so in about 10 minutes, I'm going to give you another call. I'll share my screen with you, and we'll just go from there. Yeah. I'll show you the basics. You can start shadowing me on a few of my projects. You can start from scratch. You don't need to know anything. I've got you. We've got this. You've got this. Sweet. All right. I'll see you on the next call in like 5 or 10 minutes. All right. All right, bye.
Hey, thanks for hopping back on the call. I'm sharing my screen. Can you see it? You can see the cat? Okay, cool. So before we learn anything technical, I think we need a frame of reference. Like, why are programmers or developers necessary? Like, what do we actually do and why do we get paid, right? So before we learn how to write code or, get started on a task or a job, I think it'll help us stay motivated if we understand why our job is needed in the world and what role we fill. So, in the world of creating digital products, right, like apps and websites, there are two primary career paths. So, number one is a designer, and number two is a developer, right? And the journey that we're on, you're shadowing me. I'm a developer. I'm a programmer. So, we would be category number two, a developer. So, any iPhone or Android app that you use, or any website that you use, someone had to design it. We'll talk about what that means, designing something, in just a moment, but in addition to designing it, someone also had to develop it. So let's go over what these two terms mean, designing and developing. Designing means that someone had to pick the colors, the positioning, the layout, the size of everything, the font that they were using, the font size, the way that the buttons animate when you tap or click on them, the images that are used, the icons that are used, everything. So someone had to decide exactly what it should look and feel like, and that is design. However, most people that are good enough at making things look beautiful like that, and they have a job as a designer, they're not good at writing code. So they studied and practiced for years at graphic design, right? Visual harmony, making things look beautiful. But the quote unquote designs that they create are just flat, static, lifeless screenshots, essentially, right? It's basically a static photograph of what the application or website, quote unquote, should look like. In other words, the designers, they create sort of a fake mock-up or basically a set of blueprints of how the app should look. But they're not actually creating an application or website. So the photograph or screenshot that they basically create, it is not a scrollable, clickable, living, breathing website. It's not interactive or functional yet. It's just a lifeless, basically good-looking still photograph. Okay, so that's what a designer does. Now, what does a developer or programmer do? What are we doing? What are you shadowing me? What are we doing here? So we, as the developer, we write the code to turn that design and take it from a static photograph into a real living, breathing website that you can scroll, that you can click, right? Where the data is actually powered by a database. It's interactive. It's functional, right? It's not just a screenshot. It's an app. It's a website. Having said that, right now, I want to show you the first project that you're going to shadow me on. So let me pull this up really quick. My boss just sent me this morning. So our company's designer, they designed this. It's a website mock-up, just the static, lifeless mock-up that we were just describing that designers create for a pet adoption agency. So it says, find your new bestie. It has, 4 call-outs or features. You scroll down a little bit farther. It says, meet our friends, and you can filter, do you want to see all the pets, only the dogs, only the cats? If you're interested in a pet, you can click the contact icon. It shows their photo, a little bit of a description. And for now, that's it. So the client just wants a really simple listing of their pets, something that looks nice. Cool. So I didn't design this. You didn't design this. The designer on our company's team designed this, but it's our job. You and I are going to turn this into a living, breathing, actual website, not just a pretty looking, still, lifeless photograph. So how in the world do we do that? Well, let's first talk about how our designer designed this. So our company's designer designed this mock-up that we're looking at right now in a program called Figma. You've never heard of Figma before? That's okay. It's free and it's easy to get started with. You might be wondering why you and I as the developer need the designing program called Figma. Don't worry, we'll get to that in a few minutes. But for now, I need you to go sign up for a completely free Figma account. I promise in a couple of minutes this will all make sense. So right now, pause this video lesson that we're on, and right now, while it is paused, I need you to do this. I need you to visit figma.com and sign up for a totally free brand new account. It won't cost you a penny. You do not need to enter a credit card or any sort of payment information. It's super free and easy to get started. So figma.com, click get started for free and sign up for your new account. It'll then send you an email to verify or confirm your account, and as soon as you do that, it should look something like this. It's going to ask you for your name. You can just skip that. So click skip. What kind of work do you do? Let's click developer, right? You and I are going to be a developer. Click continue. This doesn't matter. You can just click skip. If your screen doesn't look exactly like this, that's okay. Essentially, we're just trying to skip all of this introductory content to actually get into our Figma dashboard. So I'll click skip again. I don't want to invite anyone. Skip, skip, skip. Which plan would we like? Absolutely the free version, the free starter account. We don't need to pay anything. We can just get started for totally free. We don't need to enter any kind of personal or credit card information. Click continue. Click skip. Awesome. Okay, so this is your Figma dashboard. We can go ahead and close that top section. So it'll look something like this, right? Now, you can create your own design files here. Like if you were in an alternate universe and you wanted to be a designer and not a developer, you would just practice working in Figma all the time. You would practice your graphic design skills. So I'm not going to teach you graphic design. That's not what we're here to do, but just so you have a frame of reference of like what Figma is used for, I can show you in about 30 seconds. So in the top right, you could click like plus symbol design file. And this is sort of your empty canvas, right? So then you can click this icon right about here to create a frame. And then, over on the right-hand side, do you want to design something for something small, like a phone, like the size of a phone screen, or do you want to design something for a desktop or a laptop? So if I click like, MacBook Pro 14-inch, and you don't need to do this, by the way. I'm just giving you a frame of reference of what Figma is used for. But then in the top right corner, I can zoom out a little bit. Let me click zoom to 50% so it actually fits on my screen. So this white area, that's the canvas for like a laptop size screen. And then let's say I wanted to add like different boxes or different text. So I can use this icon, this square, and then I can just start dragging, like clicking and dragging different boxes, right? So I could click on that again, click rectangle, draw a second one. Maybe I want this one, so I just click on it to be blue. So with it selected, you can click fill right here and just, choose a blue color. And maybe I want this one to be green. So I click on it, click fill, click green. Maybe I want a text box inside this green box. So I click this T up here and then just, draw, click and drag like a text box on the green box and say, hello. And then I could drag and select the hello text and make it way larger. So over on the right-hand side, instead of a font size of 12, I could bump this up to like 40. And then maybe I want the text to be white. So on the right-hand side for fill, set this to white. And then I can click and drag that to be wherever I want it, so on and so forth. So you can see I'm designing, right? I'm creating shapes, I'm adjusting their sizes, I'm adding text, you can add images and icons, so on and so forth. So this is where a designer creates a design. Now, let me put this back into reference for you. So click this icon in the top left, the Figma main menu icon in this top left, and click back to files. So again, this is our Figma dashboard, right? So now we have that file that I just created. These are some basic files that Figma creates for us. This is the design that I just created, 30 seconds ago. Right now, I want to sort of invite you to that pet adoption agency that my company's designer created. So right now, this video call that we're on, below the video chat player, you'll see a bit of text with a couple of links. The first link that you see, it should be a Figma link. Go ahead and click on it, and it should open up this. So it should look something like this. It says Pet Adoption Center. So this was the design that was created by my company's designer. Right now, I just want you to sort of add this to your Figma collection or add it to your Figma dashboard so that you can go in and begin editing and inspecting it. So here's all you need to do. Just go ahead and click in the top right where it says Open in Figma. Now, I'm using Firefox, so you can see it says Firefox prevented this site from opening a pop-up window. Even if we don't open the pop-up, if you go back to your drafts, your dashboard of Figma and refresh, you should now see the Pet Adoption Center in your list of Figma files. Cool, so there it is. Now you could open up that pop-up that got blocked, just click allow the pop-up or show that pop-up. But even if that pop-up doesn't work for you, you can just go to your Figma dashboard, right? And just click on that newest Pet Adoption Center. Might need to double click on it, but there you have it. So this is the design file that our company's designer created for us, and we need to bring it to life. Now, let's get back to the question at hand. Remember, you can always zoom in the top right corner here. So instead of, if you want to zoom in a little bit, I'll zoom into like 50%. And now to scroll around in this area, you can hold down the spacebar key on your keyboard and then click and drag. Keep holding the spacebar. Cool. So let's get back to the question at hand. You're probably wondering, hey, Brad, if we're the developer or the programmer, right? We're not the designer. Why do we need this Figma design program? Good question. So you and I, we do not need to become experts at Figma. However, we do need to know at least the very basics so that we can inspect this design, right? You and I need to find the exact font that's being used, the exact font size, the exact color, right? Like the exact color code for this precise shade of purple or this shade of blue, or, if we scroll down a little bit, You can click up at the top right, zoom in to 100%. So how do we find the exact color shade value for this purple, for the highlighted text, or this little purple icon? Or you and I need to be able to inspect this to find the fine-tuned sizes and dimensions and layouts and color codes and font sizes and all that. So as a developer, you and I need to know at least the very basics of this Figma design program so that we can extract the data that we need to recreate this with code. So you and I will also need to extract, these different photographs or these different icons. Like up here, we see different icons, different color codes, so on and so forth. Now don't worry, you don't need to learn that on your own. I'm going to walk through this process with you step by step. It doesn't matter if this is the first time you've ever opened Figma, we're going to walk through this process together. So what is our job? We need to turn this design file into a living, breathing website. To do that, we're going to write code bit by bit. That sounds intimidating, but don't worry, if you have someone guiding you, it's totally doable. I think you're going to be great at this. I'm really excited. Cool. I actually need to run for today, but tomorrow I want to hop on a call with you bright and early in the morning, and I want to talk about how in the world do we begin using code to recreate this look and feel, this design. What kind of code do we even write? Where would we start typing the code? How does any of this work, right? We're going to answer all of those questions. It's going to be a lot of fun. Cool. So we're going to work through this together. I'll talk to you very soon. Hey, welcome back. Good to see you again. Let's jump right into the action. Let's pick up right where we left off. So to get started, just visit figma.com, and if you're logged in, it should automatically take you to your dashboard with your different files. And obviously we want to jump into the Pet Adoption Center, so you can just double click on it. Cool. Now to zoom in a little bit, you can use this top right tool to choose 50% or 100%. A keyboard shortcut that I like to zoom into 100%, like the actual size of things, is on Windows you would press Control and 0, and on a Mac you would press Command and 0. Okay? And then to scroll, yes, you can use, the vertical scroll bar and the horizontal scroll bar, or you can hold down the space key on your keyboard and keep holding the space bar, and then click and drag to sort of move around. Okay? Also, to zoom in and out, you can also press Control and minus or Control plus, or on a Mac, Command minus and Command plus. Cool. Anyways, we want to start turning this design into a living, breathing website, and we do that by writing code or typing out code. However, the question becomes, what kind of code are we writing, and where would we type this magical code? To answer that question, I first want to show you the easiest, fastest, simplest way to start writing code. And we'll only spend about 2 minutes doing that. And then after that, I'll show you the tool that professionals actually use in the real world. But just to get our feet wet, just to get started, I want you to visit in a new browser tab a website called CodePen. So you can see the domain is codepen.io. If you just Google for CodePen, you should be able to find this website. Now, what in the world is this CodePen website? It's not the tool that professionals use to actually build websites, but it is many professionals' favorite sort of sandbox or playground to run quick little experiments in. So if you're ever trying to learn a new concept or wrap your mind around some new difficult concept, I, to this day, even though I've been in this industry a long time, I still fire up CodePen and run through some experiments. So anyways, from the CodePen website, you can click on this Start Coding button on this left-hand side. Cool. Now, from this screen, what in the world is going on? So these different boxes, right? This one says HTML, this one says CSS, and this one says JS. So we can type code into these 3 different boxes, and then this bottom area, this is the preview of what our code creates. So just really quick, let me give you an example, right? We're trying to make this design come to life. So the first piece of content in this design that I see is this headline that says, "Find your new bestie." And then right below that, we see like a little paragraph of text that says, the most amazing list of adoptable pets at your fingertips, updated fresh daily. So back in CodePen, in the HTML box, first of all, HTML, you don't need to memorize what the acronym stands for, but it stands for Hypertext Markup Language. You don't need to memorize that. The only thing I need you to memorize right now is that HTML is the language that web pages are written in. So HTML is sort of our raw content. So for example, if we wanted a headline that says, find your new bestie, in this HTML box, let's create a heading level 1. So type H and then 1, and then hit tab on your keyboard. So it creates this code. Let me zoom in a little bit for you. Now I'll explain what's going on here in just a moment, but you can see our cursor is blinking sort of in the middle here. So type in, find your new bestie. Okay, now what is going on here? So you can see, yes, we typed in these H1. We don't know what these are called yet. We'll explain that in just a minute, but we don't actually see that in our preview. In our preview, we literally just see the text, find your new bestie. So what is this? This is called an opening tag, and this is called a closing tag. I'll explain more about that in 10 seconds from now, but below that, let's add a paragraph. So you can just type P and then hit the tab key on your keyboard. And then just say, like, a list of pets updated daily. Cool, now look at our preview. So the headline is large and bold, and the paragraph is just standard text. It's smaller and it's not bold. Now, let me explain what's truly going on here. So on a website, every little different piece of content is an element. So this heading is an element, this paragraph is an element. Elements are sort of like a sandwich. So let's take the heading. This part that I'm highlighting right now, this is the opening tag. That's like the first piece of bread on a sandwich. This part that I'm highlighting, that's the closing tag. That's the other piece of bread in the sandwich. And then your actual content, that's like the peanut butter and jelly. Same thing with the paragraph, right? It has the first piece of bread, the other piece of bread, and then the actual content of the sandwich. And there are different types of elements. So this is a heading level 1. Heading level 1 just means it's the most important heading on the page. If you wanted to create a slightly less important heading on the page, you could create a heading level 2 and then say, hello. And notice down in the preview, it's a little bit smaller. It's a little bit less important. Now, throughout this course, we're going to learn about all sorts of different HTML element types. So far, you've only seen a heading level 1, a heading level 2, and a paragraph, but there are many different types. Anything you can imagine, right? An image, a data table, a button that you can click on, a form field that you can click on and then type a value into. So anything that you can do on a web page, there is a specific, dedicated, unique HTML element type for that type of content. So in other words, HTML is just our raw content. Now you might be wondering, okay, if that's the raw content, how do I actually change the way that it looks, like the size or the color or the border or the margin and space around it? Well, that's where CSS comes into play. You don't need to memorize this acronym, but CSS stands for Cascading Style Sheet. In other words, it's how we add color and layout and dimension and size and texture and everything. It's how you add the color and design to your web page. So, for example, what if we wanted our heading level 1 to be orange? Well, we'd go into the CSS box and type in H1 to select that that's the type of element we're trying to select. And then curly brackets. If you've never made a curly bracket on your keyboard before, it's just you hold down the Shift key, and then it's the key to the right of your P key. So Shift and that key gets you curly brackets. In between the curly brackets, you can press Enter and drop down like this. And if we want it to be orange, we can just say color, orange, semicolon. And there you have it in the preview. If you wanted to, you could change it to be purple. Okay? What if we wanted our paragraph to be green? Well, you could just drop down, say P, and then curly brackets. Inside there, say color, green, semicolon. And there you have it. Now, I do want to show you just one detail. What if we had another paragraph, a second paragraph on the page, like right below this heading level 1? So you could type P, and then just say, this is a test. Notice that it is also green. So all of the paragraphs on our page are green now because we selected, we're saying any and all paragraphs should be green. Now, you might be wondering, what if I have like 10 different paragraphs on my page and I only want one of them to look unique? Like, for example, what if we added a third paragraph and said, hello, this is more text. And what if we wanted this paragraph to not be green like all the other ones? What if we wanted it to be blue? Well, check this out. On the opening P tag, the first piece of bread on this sandwich, after the P but before the greater than symbol, you can say class equals, and then a pair of quotes. I like to use double quotes, so shift and the quote key, and then make up a class name. This could be literally anything. Let's give it a class name of pizza. Obviously, that's not, the most meaningful class name in the world, but I'm just trying to illustrate to you that this could be anything. It can be pizza or unicorn or anything you make up. But try to just pick a single word. Okay? Now, over in our CSS, let's target only the elements that have a class of unicorn or pizza or whatever you chose. So to do that, instead of just typing in unicorn, because it's a class, we select a class by beginning with a period or a dot. So I'm going to say dot or period, and then the matching class name. So unicorn, and then curly brackets, and then it would just be, color blue. If you scroll down to the bottom, it's blue, but all the other paragraphs are green. Cool. Now don't worry, we don't need to get into any more technicalities or, learning about code beyond this. For this first call that we're hopping on, this is all I wanted to show you. Well, you can have a little bit of fun. Let me show you, what if you wanted this special text to be larger? So there's more to CSS than just color, right? So you could say font size, 3 rem. Don't worry about what rem means right now, but you can see that makes the text way larger. Or what if you wanted the heading level 1 to have a border around it? So on our heading level 1, you could say border 2 pixel solid green. And then, as you might imagine, now it has a green border. So this looks horrible, right? This does not look like a beautiful, visually appealing website. However, I think you're already starting to see the picture that if you got really, really good at writing CSS, you could create basically any layout and design in the world. And that's absolutely true. It may seem impossible right now, but believe it or not, over the next few video calls, you and I, we are going to write CSS and HTML, obviously, to bring to life this exact pet adoption agency website. Yes, the code that we were just writing, paragraphs and headings and then a little bit of CSS, if you get good at this and you get a little bit creative, that's how you create beautiful web pages. There's nothing else. I mean, every complicated, beautiful looking website in the world uses these two technologies, HTML and CSS. And I promise you, if you get really good at writing these two languages, there's a lot of work out there. Cool. Now, to be clear, HTML and CSS, they are way bigger than this CodePen website. So CodePen doesn't have any official affiliation. They don't own HTML and CSS. HTML and CSS are open standards. Anyone in the world can write this code. CodePen is just an easy place to start immediately typing somewhere and see a live preview, without having to know how to create files on your computer. So I'm a big fan of CodePen, and throughout you shadowing me, you're going to see me jump into CodePen time and time again just to show a quick experiment or try to explain a quick concept to you. So I like CodePen. It's a great sandbox. It's a great tool to have in your toolbox. However, CodePen is not the real tool that professionals truly use to actually write out and spell out all of their code. In other words, instead of typing your code into a web browser like a CodePen website, you probably want to create files on your actual computer. So right now I want you to open up a new website in a new tab because the tool that professionals use to actually get their true work done is this. It's a completely free program called Visual Studio Code. So the domain for this as of today is code.visualstudio.com, or if you Google for Visual Studio Code, this should come right up. This is the most popular text editing program in the world, and this is the program that myself and all of my coworkers use on a daily basis to write out and spell out our code. So, right now, before we hop off this video call for today, I want you to go ahead and download it and get it installed. It's completely free. You just click the link, it downloads it, installs it. It should be very simple. So go ahead and click, the download link here or up in the top right corner, but you can hop off or pause this video call while you get Visual Studio Code downloaded. And then once it's downloaded, just open up the installer file, and all of the default options are great. So you can just click next, next, next. If you need to pause this video call for a minute while you get VS Code downloaded and installed, that's okay. But if we're moving forward, I'm going to assume that you have VS Code installed. Now, when you open the program for the first time, it's going to look something like this. And what I want to do right now is show you how to open up a folder on your computer in VS Code. Let me explain. Let me give you some context first. So remember, our goal is that we want to create this Figma design, right, using code. So let's create, and it's for a pet adoption agency. So on the desktop of my computer, I'm going to right click and choose new folder or create new folder. I'm sure it's a little bit different on Windows, but you can figure out how to create a new folder. Let's create a brand new folder and let's name it like pet adoption or pet-adoption. Cool. Now, you don't need to create it on your desktop if you don't want to. If you want to be more organized and go into like your documents folder, but just create this somewhere on your computer where you can easily find it again and again and again. So somewhere easy to find, okay? Now, I want to show you how to open up this brand new empty folder in Visual Studio Code. So you have VS Code open, right? You can just drag and drop this new folder on top of VS Code. And then when this pops up, say, yes, I do trust the authors. Cool. Or you can also use VS Code's File menu up in the top left, like File, Edit, so on and so forth. You can click File and then Open Folder or Open Directory. However, you'll know that you opened an entire folder with VS Code because you'll see that you have this area on the left-hand side. This is the File Explorer area. So check this out. I want you to right-click on this open area over here, or you can click this symbol right here. If you hover over this icon, it says New File. So either way, I just want to create a new file in our new folder. So I'll right-click here and click New File, and now it needs to have this exact name. I want you to name the new file index.html. Index.html, and then press Enter. Now, if you look at the new folder on your desktop, yep, there you have it. The only file in it is the file that we just created. Awesome. Now, let me show you how we can view this in our web browser. So first of all, in this new index file, click so you can see your cursors blinking here. And now let's just create a heading level 1. So type H1 for a big important headline, H1, and then hit tab on your keyboard. Or if you don't want to use the tab trick, you can spell it out manually, right? So you can say less than, H1, greater than, and then, there's the closing sandwich with the /. But in between the pieces of bread, you can say like, find your new bestie, and then go ahead and save this file. So that's Command S on Mac, Control S on Windows, or you can click File Save up in the top left corner. Cool. Now, here's what I want to show you. You can view this new file. Let me find that. Here it is, right, on our computer's hard drive. We can view this in our web browser. So just open up a new browser tab, or, here's your web browser, and then I want you to just drag and drop your index.html on top of your web browser. Cool, and there you have it. So we don't see the actual H1 sandwich, like the opening tag and closing tag. We just see the HTML that actually gets rendered. And I think at this point, congratulations are in order, my friend. You just created your first web page. Now, yes, it doesn't look like this yet, but that's okay. You and I are going to walk through this step by step. At this point, though, you are now using the tools that professionals use. You have Visual Studio Code installed, we've created a folder, we've created our first little bit of code, and we are off to the races. We're going to make a ton of progress from here forward. Cool. I have to run for now, but let's hop on another call really soon. Hey, thanks for hopping on the call. Let's jump right back into the action where we left off. So remember, we opened up our new folder somewhere on your computer, your desktop, or your documents folder. We called it Pet Adoption, and then we just dragged and dropped that on top of our VS Code program. So in VS Code, the left-hand file explorer, you can open up your index.html. You can double-click on it, and there's the little bit of code we wrote. And then to preview that in your browser, you just open up your folder and then drag and drop, right, your index.html file on top of a web browser. Cool. Now the actual task at hand, my boss needs me to convert this design from Figma into a real web page. So let's keep working. So we have the heading level 1 that says find your new bestie. Let me zoom in a little bit. Let's just copy and paste this smaller standard paragraph text. So just double click in Figma now. Remember, you can go to figma.com and open up the pet adoption design, but just double click right on this standard text right here. Okay, and then you can double click one more time. And now you can select the text. So we can just select it and then just right click and copy it into your clipboard. So copy as text, or with it selected, I like to use the keyboard. So on Windows, you would press Control C, hold down the Control key and then press C, or on Mac, you would hold down the Command key and then press C. Cool. Anyways, back in VS Code, right below this heading level 1, let's press enter, and then just type a P for a standard paragraph, hit tab, and again, if you don't want to use the tab trick, you can just type less than, P, greater than, cool. In between the paragraphs, just paste in your clipboard. So you can hit Control S on Windows or Command S on Mac, that'll save it, and then if you refresh your web browser, so in Google Chrome, refresh, perfect. Now, let's go look at our design. So in Figma, let's add these two buttons. So right below that text, we see, like a bluish purple that says View Pets, and then this Manage Pets. So how in the world do you create links or buttons? Well, let me show you. So back in VS Code, let's drop down. So at the end of this paragraph line, you can put your cursor here and then press enter. Cool. So we've seen how to create a heading level 1 or a paragraph or a heading level 2, but how would you create a link that you can click on to go to a different page? Well, type in the letter A and then hit tab. A stands for anchor, but really this is how you create a hyperlink or a link that you can click on and then it will take you to a different page. Now we don't have a different page to link to yet. So in these quotes, so href is essentially where do you want to go when someone clicks on this link. So for this href value, for now, let's just put a placeholder £sign or hashtag. So, hold down shift and press the number 3. We can fill this in with a real value much later on. And then in between the opening and closing tags, the sandwich, so right here where my cursor is now, we can just say, if you look at Figma, it should say View Pets. So back in VS Code, View Pets. Okay? And then let's have another link. So A, hit tab, give it a placeholder hashtag. The actual text that you would click on, just go look at Figma, it should say Manage Pets. So, Manage Pets. Let's give that a save, and if you go back into Google Chrome and reload or refresh, beautiful. Now when you click on these, nothing happens. But I want to show you how easy it is to create a link that actually works. Imagine when you click on Manage Pets, it should take you to a totally separate page. But for now, we don't have a separate page to link to, so let's imagine it should go to google.com for some odd reason when you click this. So for the href value for the Manage Pets, instead of the hashtag, you could say https://google.com. You could go ahead and hit Command or Control S, reload, and now when I click on Manage Pets, as you might have guessed, I go to google.com. Cool. So that's how you create clickable links. Now, at this point, let's not worry about actually going anywhere. Let's put that back to just the hashtag. By the way, if you're wondering how I undid or went back to the previous version, on Windows it's Control and Z, the Z key, and on Mac it's Command Z. Cool. So we'll fill in these values later. At this point, though, let's start to worry about the actual styling, right? Because this is just plain text. But if we look at Figma, this should be large and bold. It should be white. The background should be this sort of dark blue, very dark blue. These buttons should have rounded corners. This button has a purplish blue background, and this one has a white border, so on and so forth. So in order to actually add this design and this styling, we need to use CSS. So let's go back into VS Code. So far, this code is just HTML. Now remember, in CodePen, there were these different boxes where you could type in the HTML and the CSS. So now the question becomes, when you're actually creating a website yourself by hand, manually, where in the world can you start typing CSS code? Well, let me show you. Right now, I want you to place your cursor at the very top of our document or our page. So right before the heading level 1, just, the very, very start of our file, go ahead and press enter twice. And then, so I moved my cursor up here to the very beginning, and I need you to type this in with me. DOC for doc, and then hit tab on your keyboard. It's going to give you all of this starter code. Now let me explain what's going on here. So every website has these two main categories or areas. One is called the head, and the other area is called the body. The head section is where we describe, the overall title of the page. Like, see where it says document? This is what would show up in the tab or sort of the title bar of your web browser. So instead of document, you could say like our cool title and hit save. And then if you refresh, notice you see that up here now. Cool. And so the point here is that the head section has sort of metadata about the page. And this is also where you can link to CSS or cascading style sheets. Now, the body section, that's where your actual raw content goes. So let's move all of this content to live inside the body area. So just select, our heading level 1, our paragraph, and our 2 links, copy them, or actually let's just cut them. So to cut them into your clipboard, it's Control X on Windows and it's Command X on Mac. So with that in your clipboard now, just go into this body area, so right here, and press Command or Control V. Awesome. And then to fix the indentation, you can just select these 3 elements. So just click and drag and then press Tab on your keyboard. Beautiful. Cool. Now that we have our head section and body section set up, let's actually add our CSS file, right? So we can start adding those purplish blue colors and the font sizes and colors and so on and so forth. So here's how you do that. In the left-hand sidebar, let's create a brand new file. So we already have our index.html. You can right-click in this empty area or click this icon to create a new file. But let's create a new file and let's name it. It could be anything. So it could be pizza or unicorn, but it needs to end in .css. So I'll name it like, styles.css. So styles.css. Go ahead and press enter. And now just to test to make sure it's working, you can select everything on the page by selecting the body element. And let's just say color should be orange. So color, orange, semicolon, body, curly brackets. So save that, and then back in our HTML tab, here's how we link to that file. Because currently, if you saved our HTML file, that will not work. Nothing is orange, even if you refresh. So the way that you actually attach or link the style sheet to your HTML is in your head section. So maybe below this title line, with my cursor right here, type in link, and then hit tab on your keyboard. Cool. Now for the href value, you just point towards your new file. So we named ours styles.css. Cool. So now we're telling our HTML page, hey, pull in this CSS file. You can save that, and now if you refresh your browser, awesome, it's actually loading. Now we don't actually want the text to be orange, so let's go back into our style sheet, so styles.css. Let's erase that. We don't need the body text to be orange. And instead, let's give ourselves a reasonable goal for the remainder of this call. So let's go look at our design in Figma. Here's what I think we should do. So you can see this top area has this dark, really dark blue background, and then below that, there's the actual pet area. So let's just try to get the dark blue area, at least sort of the skeleton for that set up. Let me explain what I mean. So in our HTML, we have our headings and our links. Below that, let's just have like a heading level 3, so H3, and then hit tab and say like for call out area here. So I'm saying that this is sort of a placeholder for this aspect of the design, right? And then below that, let's have this entirely other section that should have the white background instead of the dark blue. That's the pet area. So just for a placeholder, let's have like even below that, so drop down a couple times. Let's have another heading level 3 that just says like actual pet area placeholder. You can give that a save. You can refresh if you want to. Cool. So let me explain what I'm doing. And again, there's no right or wrong way. There's no specific order to building out a web page. It's just my own personal preference. But our goal for right now, I want to create sort of a contained top area that has this dark blue background color. So mentally, that's how I'm dividing up the page into manageable chunks. Like I want to design or code this chunk of the page first. And then later on, we can worry about this bottom white background area. So the question becomes, how can you divide a page up into sort of these overall chunks? Well, let me show you. So back in our HTML, right, this would be the area that has the dark blue background. So how can we sort of group all of these elements together? Well, there's a tool in HTML just for this. So check this out. Right before the H1, but inside our body element, we can say, and instead of using the tab trick, let's actually spell it out. So opening symbol, div for div, and then greater than symbol. But we don't want the matching closing tag right here. So you can get rid of that. So just the opening tag. And then after this heading level 3, so drop down, let's close out that element. So less than forward slash, and not a backslash, but a forward slash. So this is the slash next to your shift key that your right pinky would hit. And then close the div. Now, you can nest everything inside of that. So from the H1 down to our H3, you can select that and hit tab. Cool. So these elements live inside or are nested inside this div element. Now, div is a unique element. It doesn't have any semantic meaning or value. So H1 actually means something, right? You're telling the browser and the visitor that this is the most important heading on the page. You know, P tells the browser that it's just standard text. A tells the browser that it's an anchor or a link. Div doesn't tell the browser anything about this content. It's just sort of an arbitrary division. It lets us slice up or divide up the page into areas that make sense to us as a developer. However, check this out now. This is the division or section of the page that we can give that dark blue background color to. So let's do this. In our HTML, on the opening div, let's give it a class of, so class equals quotes, and we get to make up a name. Let's call it like top dash section. So top section. Go ahead and save that. And now in our styles.css file, make sure it's empty, and then we can just say dot to select a class. So dot top dash section, and then curly brackets. You can drop down. Now to refresh your memory, why do we have the dot or the period here? It's because this is a class that we're selecting. So we're not trying to style any and all div elements on the page, right? So we didn't just say div curly brackets because that would select every single div on the page. And you might have a lot of different divs on one page. So this is our way of saying we only want to style or select the divs that specifically have this class of top section. So dot or period top section, curly brackets, and let's just give it a background color. So background, you can see VS Code can help us out. So you can just click on that to auto-complete it. And now here's the real question. We don't want to just say blue, right? So you could say, blue semicolon and then color colon white semicolon. And if you hit save and reload, well, clearly that's not the color we're looking for. However, you can see that this code is all in that one div, and then that's the white background pet area below. So now the question is, how do we get that specific shade, that dark blue or almost purple color? Well, let's go into Figma. And normally selecting a color is going to be a lot easier. So for example, let me zoom in a little bit. If we were trying to find this this purple color for the View Pets button, you just simply double click on the element that you're interested in. And with it selected over in this right-hand menu, you can scroll down and you'll see the fill color. However, it's a little bit trickier because we're trying to select the background color of this entire frame. And if you're new to Figma, selecting that is not going to be very intuitive, but don't worry. Throughout building this site, you're going to become way more familiar with Figma, and we'll learn how to select colors bit by bit. But for now, let me show you where you can go. So in this left-hand menu, scroll up to the very top of this scrollable area, and then click on this one that says Homepage Design. So not the page that says Homepage Design, but below that, these different ones you'll see like favicon, fallback, form overlay, and homepage design. So click on homepage design. So this is the homepage design frame. And now with that selected over in this right-hand menu, you can see that it has a fill color. So that's the exact shade of that dark blue that we want. So just click on that and copy it into your clipboard. So Control C on Windows or Command C on Mac. Okay, back in VS Code, for the background color, get rid of blue and paste in your clipboard. And now at the start of this 6-digit hexadecimal color code, so right here, we want to place a # or a hashtag. So Shift and the 3 key for this symbol, and then that code that we pasted in. You can go ahead and hit save, and now back in our browser, if you preview or refresh, there is that exact shade of blue. Awesome. Now, this still is not looking anything like a beautiful website, but we've made a lot of progress in this video call. We learned how to manually create a style sheet, how to link to it, how to write a little bit of CSS, and also how to start to divide up our page into divisions or sections. Right? So the actual pets will go down here. If we look at Figma design, we zoom out a little bit. So this is the entire dark blue area, and then later on, this will be the white background pet area. So we're already starting to divide up the page, and we're making consistent progress. In our next call, don't worry, we'll actually start to make the buttons look like buttons, so on and so forth. Things might feel overwhelming or impossible right now, but don't worry. Give it another 20 minutes and I think it's all going to start to click. Awesome. I'll see you soon. Hey, welcome back. Let's pick up right where we left off. Okay, so we've got this top dark blue background area. The first thing I want to work on is removing this awkward gap that we see, to the sides of it horizontally and also above it. Right? So this top blue background section, this should sit flush against the edges of the web browser window. Now you might be wondering what in the world is causing that white gap that we're seeing, and I can let you know that it's the overall HTML or body element. Let me explain. So if we go into VS Code, the folder that we've been working in, go into your styles.css file, and up at the very, very top, let's add a new line. And we're going to target the body element, so body, curly brackets. You can drop down in between the curly brackets, and then actually, instead of selecting only the body, we can actually say body, comma, and then also select the overall HTML element. So if you look in your index.html file, you can see that the entire document, the entire page, starts with an opening HTML tag, and then down at the very bottom, that gets closed out. And then nested inside of the HTML tag, there's our body tag, and then the body gets closed. So these sort of overall page wrapper elements, they have a little bit of margin, and that's what's creating this awkward gap around our dark blue background area. So to fix this, here's what I would do. We're targeting both body, comma, and HTML. In the curly brackets, let's just say margin, colon, 0, semicolon. Let's say padding, colon, 0, semicolon. And then the background of the overall page as a whole, right? So like this area down here, the entire browser window, that's white by default, but if you wanted to, you could spell out a color. So you could say background dash color, colon, and now you could set this to gray, for example, right? So if we go ahead and hit Control or Command S and save that, and then back in our browser, instead of clicking this refresh icon, you can refresh using a keyboard shortcut. You can press Control R on Windows or Command R on Mac. Cool, so that removes that awkward gap, but we don't actually want the overall background color to be gray. So let's just set that to white. So white, go ahead and save that. Cool. So now, just like our Figma reference design, our top blue background area is sitting flush against the edge of the browser viewport, or the page as a whole. The next thing I want to focus on is sort of this vertical gap that the dark blue background area should have, and then also the horizontal spacing, right? So in other words, we don't want it to sit in the very top left corner. So the first thing I want to show you back in our CSS is we already have this area that's targeting top section. So the way that we can add some vertical space, we could say padding dash top colon, and then let's just give it maybe 50 pixels. So 50 px semicolon. You can go ahead and save that, and then watch if we refresh. Awesome, we have this little bit of spacing. Now, the question becomes, how do we know the exact number to give? So I just made up a value of 50, but that doesn't match the reference design precisely. Right? So if you zoom into 100% in Figma, so on Windows, Control 0, or on Mac, Command 0, and then let's scroll up. Like, how would we find this exact size of this vertical gap here? Well, Figma actually has a great feature for this. So click on this area, right? So if I hover over the Find Your New Bestie text, if I click on that, and then on Windows, I want you to hold down the Alt key on your keyboard, or on Mac, I want you to hold down the Option key on your keyboard, and now hover over, not this area because that's referencing the faded gradient circle in the background, but if you hover over, this very top left area, or even this label that says Homepage Design, and this whole time I'm continuing to hold down the Alt or Option key. But notice in red, right above the Find Your New Bestie, it's telling us, hey, this vertical gap here is 139 pixels. So that's the value that we were looking for, right? So in our code, instead of padding top 50, let's say 139, let's also give it padding dash bottom, 139 pixels, colon, semicolon. Let's go ahead and save that. And if we refresh our page, awesome. At this point, you might be wondering, hey, what's the difference between padding and margin? Don't worry, I promise we will cover that in depth a little bit later on when we start worrying on the spacing and sizing of our text elements. For now though, let's focus on adding a bit of horizontal spacing. So we added padding to the top and padding to the bottom of our blue intro area. So you might think that adding horizontal spacing so that it sits in about this far, you might think that's as simple as just saying padding left and padding right. However, it's not. Let me explain. Now, if everyone in the entire world only viewed websites on a uniform, 24-inch monitor that was the exact same size and, pixel density, then you could get away with something like that. But in the real world, some people are visiting your website on a tiny little smartphone, some people are viewing it on a small laptop, and other people are viewing it on a 50-inch desktop monitor. And what I'm trying to get across here is we don't want the actual text content of our page to fill up the entire width if someone was viewing this on a 50-inch, huge desktop monitor. That's just uncomfortably wide. The human eye doesn't want to have to scan that far to the left and to the right. So in other words, we want to sort of set a maximum width value and then center our content, within that sort of maximum centered width. If you look at almost any popular, famous, beautiful website, you'll notice that that's what they do. So how do we do that? Let me show you. Back in our code, on our top section area, let's add another property. So maybe below padding bottom, let's say max dash width. And let's just say 1066 px, semicolon. Let's go ahead and give that a save and then refresh. Let me zoom out a little bit to simulate if I was on a larger monitor. Cool, so you can see that's limiting us. It's only going to have a maximum width of that size. Now the question is, how would you center this horizontally? Later on, we can learn about more advanced ways of centering content, but the simplest way, without getting into more detail, would just be to say margin, colon, 0 auto, semicolon. So as soon as we refresh, cool. So now that area is centered. However, we want the dark blue background to fill up the entire width of the screen. Even if someone was on a 50-inch desktop monitor, we want the background color to use all of that space. We just don't want our actual content to use up all of that space. Now again, later on we can learn about more advanced ways to handle that sort of layout, but let me show you what I think is the most intuitive way of understanding this. Here's what I would do. In our HTML, so we have our div with a class of top section. I'm actually going to create an extra wrapper div that's wrapped around the outside of this div. So right before this opening div, let's say, div, and then we don't want the closing tag to be right there, so you can delete that. And then we want the closing div to be down here. And now the browser won't get confused without proper indentation. The indentation is just for you and I to understand what's going on, but you could select this inner content and press tab to indent it, right? So this div lives inside of this div. Now let's give this overall div a class of maybe like top section, let's say top section wrapper. Cool, now here's what I would do. Back in our style sheet, let's create a new rule where we target .top section wrapper. And then I would just move the background color, so copy the background color, or cut the background color line, and move it into this rule. Let's go ahead and save that, and if we refresh, perfect. So now that wrapper div, it can take up the full entire space. The inner div is only going to take up the middle centered portion, but we still get that full background color illusion. Again, this is a common technique that many websites across the world use. Awesome. At this point, before we worry about fine-tuning our headline in this paragraph, I think the most fun that we can have in this call would be to make these links actually look like buttons, right? So if you look at the Figma design, I think that's where we're going to have our most fun educational moment. We can style this content a little bit later, but I think making these links and buttons come to life, that is going to feel like a lot of progress. Now, before we do that, I don't know about you, but I'm sick of having to go into Chrome and manually either hit this refresh icon or hit Command or Control R every single time we save changes. So right now I want to show you my favorite workflow in VS Code. So jump back into the VS Code program, and over on this left-hand side, I want you to click on this icon right here. If you hover over it, it says Extensions. Go ahead and click on that Extensions icon. And now up in this top search bar, I want you to search for Live Preview. Now, if you're anything like me, I don't like to install random extensions or plugins on my computer that aren't from, reputable, certified sources. And this preview, or excuse me, this extension that I'm a big fan of, it is created by Microsoft themselves. If we're trusting them to create Windows and they also create VS Code, I think we can trust them with this extension. So when you see this live preview, as of our call that we're on right now, it has 2.7 million installs. So a lot of people trust this. Just go ahead and click install on this live preview by Microsoft. So install. Cool. It just takes a second. It's already done. And now check this out. You can go ahead and close this tab right here. And then in the left-hand side, click on this top icon again, this Explorer icon. Cool. Now, here's the cool part. View your HTML file, your index.html file. When with it open, in this top right corner, you'll see this icon. It looks like a split pane, and then there's like a little search magnifying glass in the bottom right corner. If you hover over it, it says Show Preview. This is what that extension just gave us. Watch this. As soon as I click Show Preview, yes, that's right, our preview of our page, we don't have to jump to our browser now. It's right here in VS Code. Now, I'm on a small screen right now, so to make space if you want to, you can hide the sidebar here by pressing Control B or Command B. That gives us a little bit more space. But there you have it. You see if I click right about here on the border between the two, you can give yourself more space to code or more space to preview, but hopefully you're on a larger screen and you can divvy up that space accordingly. But check this out. Not only do we not have to jump to our browser every time we make a change, it gets even better. Let's take this headline, for example, where it says find your new bestie. If I add an exclamation, notice it shows up right away. Not only did I didn't even have to hit Control S to save the file. I didn't have to jump to Chrome. I didn't have to hit refresh. It literally gets updated after every keystroke. And this is not just for our HTML, it also works for our CSS. Right? So like if I change the top section wrapper, if I change this, you don't have to do this, but like if I change its background color to orange or yellow, you're seeing those updates in real time without even having to save. Let me Control Z or Command Z to undo that back to the real value that we wanted. Cool. Now you will still want to save your files, every 5 or 10 minutes, just in case if your computer crashes, you don't want to lose your progress. But now you don't have to save every 5 seconds just to see a preview in your browser. You have a live preview right here. Cool. Having said that, for the remainder of this call, let's work on something fun. Let's bring these buttons to life. Actually, really quick, before we do that, you can see that on smaller screens, right? So this is about the width of a smartphone. You can see there's absolutely zero horizontal space between the edge of our dark blue area and our actual content. And I think there should always be at least, like 16 pixels of, padding like this. So what you can do is maybe just on this top section wrapper, let's give it just a tiny bit of padding left and padding right. So padding left, 16 pixels. And then padding right, so padding dash right, 16px, semicolon. Cool. So now even on a tiny screen that's super narrow, we're always going to have that little bit of a horizontal gap. But on larger screens, if I go back to Google Chrome, you get the idea, right? It's still just that maximum centered, maxed width. Beautiful. Now let's start working on our links or buttons. So let's find this view pets link right here. Let's find it in our HTML. So here it is, that A element that has text of view pets. Let's give it a class. So let's give it a class name, class equals quotes, and let's just give it a name of like our dash button. And let's just say BTN for short. So our dash BTN. So you can save that. You don't even need to save it, but just so you don't lose your progress. And then go into our CSS file. Let's make a brand new rule down at the very bottom here. And let's select that class. So dot our dash BTN, curly brackets, you can drop down. And now let's get to work. So we want to make it look like this view pets button here. Let me zoom in a little bit. Cool. So the first thing I want to do is find that exact shade of bluish purple. So if I double click on this button and then in the right hand side of this menu in Figma, the fill color. So I want to click on that and copy it into my clipboard, Control or Command C. And let's get to work. So I'll say background color. In VS Code, if you just start to type in what you're looking for, again, it's going to suggest it. Type in a hashtag or pound sign and then paste in your clipboard. Cool, and now you're starting to see that live preview is really helpful. Let's also set the color to white, so the text. So color, You could just say white, or the color code, the hexadecimal color code for white is 6Fs, or for a shortcut, it's just 3Fs. Okay, next up, let's remove the underline, right? So by default, links have an underline, but we don't want that. So you could say text dash decoration colon none semicolon. Cool, that gets rid of the underline. Next up, let's give it a little bit of padding. Now, exactly how much padding should we give it? A bit later on in another call, we can learn how to dig into Figma to find that exact value, but just to keep our momentum rolling right now, let's just say padding, and I can just eyeball it. I think we need about 13 pixels of vertical padding and maybe like 25 pixels of horizontal padding. Cool. Now you might notice I didn't have to say padding dash top, padding dash bottom, padding dash left, padding dash right. So there's a shortcut in CSS. If you just say padding, and then if you just give it one value, it's going to use that for all 4 directions, right? Top, bottom, left, right. If you give it 2 values, it's going to use the first value for your vertical, your top and your bottom, and the second value for your horizontal, your left and your right. So I think that looks pretty good. Okay, and then finally, remember, if you look in Figma, it's supposed to have rounded edges. So here's what you can do. With CSS, you can say border dash radius, and then if you just wanted them to be, slightly rounded, you could say like 4 pixels. If you look really closely on the preview, you'll see it. If you could say like 10 pixels or 20 pixels, but if you just give it a really large value of like 1,000 pixels, that's going to create this sort of pill shape, right? Where it's entirely rounded down to the middle and then the next rounded edge starts. Cool. Just so we don't lose our progress, let's go ahead and save this file. So Control or Command S, we can, view this on a slightly wider screen. And even though it doesn't look beautiful yet, you can see that the design is starting to take shape. Slowly but surely, this is starting to look a little bit more like this. And I promise you, with each call that we hop on, this is just going to start to feel a little bit more natural, a little bit quicker, and a little bit less confusing. I promise I'm not going anywhere. We are going to work through this bit by bit until we're done. So hang in there with me. Cool. I'll see you very soon.
Hey, thanks for jumping on the call. So at the end of our last session, you and I were writing a bit of HTML and CSS, and you mentioned that you were feeling a little bit burnt out, and that's totally normal. Nothing wrong with that, but I did want to talk about it really quick. I just wanted to right away let you know there's nothing wrong with that. I remember when I was first learning how to program, I felt burnt out the entire time. Like even just something as simple as like having a paragraph of text and learning how to align it to the right edge or the left edge. I would just get super confused and overwhelmed, and that's completely normal. I just want to reassure you, there's nothing wrong. You're learning something entirely new from the ground up. So, you have about 1 hour of experience under your belt, so don't worry. You don't need to feel discouraged, and it's okay to feel stressed when you're learning something new, but don't feel extra stressed thinking that you're already behind progress or anything like that. You're doing fine. You're doing great. However, on that topic of being burnt out or stressed out, I wanted to share some tips with you that have helped me over the years. It's something I call finding your joy while programming. Let me explain what I mean. So someone with a physical job, just sort of the process of their daily job of like working out their muscles, getting some sunshine, coming home and eating a good meal, you can sort of self-regulate because exercise is good for you, right? With a programming job, there's nothing to sort of rescue your mental state. There's no physical to pull you out of a bad mental mood. It's programming. It's all mental. Now, I'm not saying you can't exercise before or after you program or go get some sunshine. But for large hours at a time when you're programming, there's no physical aspect to rescue your mentality, your mood. Like it's all just your own attitude and mental mood. So here's some tips that have helped me. So a big one for me is music, background music while I'm programming. And instead of just my favorite actual real music, what I like is background music so that it helps me focus on the task. So things like video game soundtracks or like, the instrumental soundtrack to your favorite movie, something without a lot of words or vocals or singing, background music, almost like elevator music, that helps you focus on the task, like low stimulation, helps to relax. On that same topic, you might want to invest in a decent pair of headphones. You don't need to spend very much money at all. Nowadays, you can get a pretty good pair for like 50, 60, 70 bucks. Or my personal guilty pleasure is a mechanical keyboard. If you don't know what that is, it's a rabbit hole. But there's a whole world of keyboards to type on that are more, satisfying to push the keys, the sound they make. For me, I sort of go to my happy place when I'm programming because of the mechanical keyboard. It just puts me in a happy mood. But it could be something as simple as like buying a new tea or coffee that you've never tried before, just any sort of self-care routine so that you associate, studying and programming with positivity, with gratitude, positive mindset. Anyways, you get the idea. Just any sort of routine of self-care, self-soothing, and enjoyment. It's really important because with programming, there are no shortcuts. I mean, really in a lot of fields, but especially in programming, they say that you need 10,000 hours to get, good or competent at it. Now, don't worry, I'm not saying you need to shadow me for 10,000 hours, but you need some, practice. There's no ultimate shortcut for those hours. You can't be in a rush. You just need to enjoy the journey. And so you need to get in a habit of feeling calm and grateful while you're practicing your programming. So anyways, maybe do a little bit of brainstorming, a little bit of journaling. How could you set up your physical environment, your mental environment to put you in that right headspace while you're studying and programming? Cool. I'll see you on our next call very soon.
Hey, welcome back. Let's pick up right where we left off. So here I am in VS Code, and actually, before we start finishing our button styling, I first want to tell you a few tips about VS Code. So the first thing I want to mention is that by default, I feel like the text size for our coding area is too small. Maybe it's just personal preference, but I don't want to wear out my eyes unnecessarily, so I prefer a slightly larger font size. So this is, so our code is easier to read. So first, let me show you how to sort of zoom in the VS Code app entirely, and then after that, I'll show you how to fine-tune just the text size for our code. So if you press Control plus, so Control on Windows, Control and the plus symbol near the delete or backspace key, or on Mac, it's Command and the plus symbol near the backspace or delete key. That's going to zoom in your entire application. So yes, that makes our code a little bit easier to read, but it also zoomed in, the entire interface, the tabs, the icons. And I don't know about you, but I don't want to increase the size of our interface and tabs. I just want to increase the font size. So what you can do is open up your settings file. So on Windows, press Control and comma, or on Mac, press Command and comma. That'll open up this screen, and now I want you to click on this icon right here. So if you hover over it, it says Open Settings JSON. Go ahead and click that. Cool. Now, inside these curly brackets, you can see window zoom level because we just we zoomed in the entire application. We probably don't want that. We want to put that back to 0 and then hit Control or Command S to save it. Cool. You actually, because 0 is the default, you actually don't need that. But inside these curly brackets, I want you to say quotes and then editor.font size. And the S in size needs to be capitalized like this. So quotes, editor.font size quotes, and then say colon. And then personally, I like to bump this up to something like 16. And you can go ahead and hit Control or Command S. Cool. Okay, another feature in VS Code that I want to show you is that it can auto-indent your code for you. Right? So back in our HTML, remember how sometimes you would have to manually select content and then press Tab to indent it? Now you don't have to indent it. Your code will work fine without indentation, but just so that it's easier as a developer to see which elements are nested inside of other elements, I think it helps to always have perfect indentation. However, if you don't want to have to babysit and manage that indentation, check this out. In our settings.json file, so after this font size line, say comma, and then on a new line, let's say quotes, and then editor.format on save, and the O in on is capital and the S in save is capital, and then after the quotes, comma, and then just set that to the word true. Go ahead and hit save, and now check this out. I'm a big fan of this. So now, even if the indentation in our HTML gets completely messed up, you can just hit save, Control or Command S, and every time you save your file, VS Code will automatically have perfect indentation for you. Cool. Also, I don't know about you, but I don't want to indent 4 spaces each time you hit tab. I just want to indent twice. And it's just a bit of personal preference, but I feel like across most development teams and companies, 2 is the standard more than 4. However, whatever your personal preference is, let me show you how you can set that. So in our settings.json file, just add a comma and then say quotes, editor.tab size, and the S in size is capital, colon, and then just set this to the number 2, hit Control or Command S, and now if you go into your HTML file and hit save, Well, for a brand new file, it would switch that automatically to 2, but because this file already exists, it's going to try to respect that, that the tab size is 4. So in the bottom, at VS Code, towards the bottom right about here, you see where it says spaces and then a number. If you click on that, you can use this default option of indent using spaces, and then just set this to the number 2. So click on 2. Now it remembers that for this file, that's what we want. And now if you click save on this HTML file, you can see, awesome. It automatically indents using 2 spaces for each tab. We can go into our CSS file and do the same thing, right? So just click spaces on the bottom, click spaces, click 2, hit save. Beautiful. Now in the future, you'll never need to set spaces down here on the bottom ever again. VS Code will now use our default that we just set in our settings file. So every file that you create for the rest of history on this personal computer that you're on will use 2. Cool. One last tiny detail before we actually start building out our button styles, and that is that some people don't like the default dark color scheme of VS Code. So for some people, the dark color scheme is hard on your eyes. For other people, a light white color scheme is hard on your eyes. It's just personal preference, but let me show you how you can switch that. On Windows, press Control, Shift, and P all at the same time. On Mac, hold down Command, Shift, and P. It's going to open up this menu. And now I want you to type in the word color, and we're looking for this where it says Preferences, color theme. Go ahead and click on that. Now you can see by default it's selected as dark modern. However, you could choose any of these. So light modern, for example, if you click on that, it's going to look like this. So that's totally your personal preference. Perhaps one of them strains your eyes more or less. Cool. And then another personal preference, I don't like this unnecessary breadcrumb menu that I'm selecting right now. So you can see above our code, if you click into like this heading level 1 in our HTML, it's trying to give you sort of like an ancestor view of like, this is your heading level 1, and that's nested in this div, and that's nested in this div, and that's nested in the body, which is nested in the HTML. So maybe you like this feature, but if you're anything like me, I don't want any extra clutter on the screen. So let me show you how to disable this breadcrumb bar. Just go into your settings.json file, and maybe down at the bottom, just add a comma at the end of the last line and say quotes. And in the quotes, if you just start to search for breadcrumbs, you'll see breadcrumbs.enabled, that's the one we're interested in, and just set its value to false. So as soon as you hit Control or Command S, cool, that breadcrumb menu is gone. And then finally, for now, I don't like this unnecessary area that I'm highlighting right now. This is called a mini map. So if you have a really long text file, you can use this to scroll the file and see sort of a super zoomed out preview of the file. Maybe you like that, but again, I don't like any extra clutter on my screen. So I like to disable that. So in your settings configuration, just add a new line in here and say quotes. And if you start to search for minimap, we're looking for the one that's called editor minimap.enabled, and then just set its value to false. Go ahead and hit Control or Command S. Perfect. Now that's gone. Beautiful. Personally, I'm fine with the dark color scheme instead of the light color scheme, so I'm actually just going to delete this line in my settings file, the workbench color theme. Just get rid of that, hit save. Beautiful. Now let's get actually to work here. So now that we've kind of customized things a little bit, let's start working on these button styles. So this first button already looks pretty similar to the Figma design, but this second button looks nothing like what it should, right? If we look at Figma, zoom in a little bit, it should have a transparent background and a white border. So there's a million different ways that you could organize your CSS, but if we go into our HTML, right, there's the second A element that says manage pets. So you could give it an entirely new class. So let's say class equals, and then just make up a new class name, right? However, most of the properties should be the same as this button, right? We want to say remove the underline from links, and we want to give it the same amount of padding, and we want it to have rounded corners. So most of it should be recycled from this. So here's what I like to do. Give this the exact same class of our dash button, right? That gives us this. And then what you can do is just give it a second class that customizes it or overrides those values. So our dash btn space, and inside these quotes, but after a space, you can give it a second and a third and a fourth class name. You can give it as many class names as you want. You can give it 50 or 100 class names, but let's just say like our button, and then let's give it a secondary class of like our dash button. And I'm just making this naming scheme up, but it's dash dash, maybe like outline. So these dashes don't mean anything to the web browser. This is just a popular naming convention. It's called BEM or BEM, but that has nothing to do with what we're talking about on this call. You literally could have named this unicorn. Anyways, this is just a naming scheme that I'm a big fan of, but let's go ahead and save that and now go into our style sheet. And down at the very bottom, let's say dot to target a class, and it's our button dash dash, so 2 dashes, dash dash, outline, curly brackets. And let's do this. Let's say background color should be transparent, semicolon, and then we want to give it a border of 2 pixels solid white. Cool. And then I think there should be a little bit more of a horizontal gap between the two of these. So let me show you what I would do. There's a million ways of doing this, but I would probably just give, back in our HTML, the first A element, the first link, I would give it a second class, so space, after our button, and make up a name. Again, it could be pizza, unicorn, but let's name it something like utility MR, which stands for, and I'm just making this up, but like utility margin right. Go ahead and save that. Back in our style sheet, let's say, dot utility MR dash MR, and maybe like margin right 10px. I just named it this so that if there's anywhere else in our entire web design or our entire page that needs margin right of 10 pixels, we can just give it that class of utility MR for margin right. There is no right or wrong way to organize your HTML and CSS like this. This is just how I would do it. Cool. Now, before we end this call, let's focus on the font size and the font family that's being used, because this is still not quite looking like this, and a big part of that has to do with the font family that's being used. Let me explain. So if you double click on our purple button here that says View Pets, and then double click on it again, in the right-hand menu, you can see that in Figma, it's using a font called Source Sans Pro. In addition to that, it's also semi-bold. So it's not regular, and it's not bold or black, it's semi-bold. So the question is, how can we use this exact font, and how do we set the exact font weight and font size? How do we do that with CSS? Well, let me show you how you set the font family first. So let's take our button, for example, where we've given it a background color and all these different properties. You could say font-family. And notice by default, the web browser wants to use this serif font, this old time, Times New Roman looking font. So that type of font is a serif font. But if we change this to sans-serif, sans just means without, notice now our buttons are using a more modern sans-serif looking font. Now you can get more specific. Like if there was a specific font that you really liked, you put it in quotes. So like Arial or Tahoma or Verdana. However, when you try to use a specific font like this, here's a good question. What if the person that's visiting your website doesn't have that font installed on their device, right? Like not every computer and phone has all of the exact same fonts installed. So what you could do is have a font stack. So you could say like comma, right? And let me give you an example. So like if someone's computer doesn't have Verdana installed, like if we spell Verdana wrong on purpose to simulate not having that font on our computer, cool, the browser's going to go, okay, I don't have this font, comma, let me use Arial. And then you could have multiple fonts in your font stack. So like as your backup, you could say sans serif. Now, serif or sans serif doesn't go in quotes because that's just a category of font. Actual font names go in quotes. So then, if we put this to maybe like serif instead of sans serif, if someone didn't have Arial installed on their computer, so if I spell that wrong on purpose, you can see now it's using serif as the fallback, and then if change that to sans-serif, it's using that. So here's the question though. If our Figma design is using Source Sans Pro, I can tell you right now, most people's phones and computers are not going to have that font installed by default. So this is where Google Fonts comes into play. Google Fonts, so in a new tab, if you just search for Google Fonts or visit fonts.google.com, you'll see that Google Fonts hosts all sorts of cool free font files on their servers. And then it's really easy to make sure that anyone's device, phone or computer can download and get those fonts on demand. So from the Google Fonts website, if we just search for Source Sans Pro, I know that that's the font that the designer is using from Figma. Whoops, did I spell it wrong? Search for Source Sans. So Google Fonts doesn't have Source Sans Pro, but they have Source Sans 3, which is very similar, and that's what I'm going to use. So if you just search Google Fonts for Source Sans, click on Source Sans 3, and now we don't need to download the font. Instead, we want to scroll down a little bit, and we want to select the font weights that we need. So I can tell you right now that 400, a weight of 400 is the standard width. So anything smaller than 400 is sort of a light or thin, and anything above that is sort of a heavier bold. So we want the 400 for sure. You can close that. We also want the semi-bold and bold. So semi-bold is a weight of 600. Let's click, this plus symbol to include that. And then let's also grab bold of 700. Cool. So now that we have everything we need, we can click this icon in the top right to view our selected families. And now here's what we're going to do. Down at the very bottom here, you see all this code that it's giving us? So it starts with a link tag. Just go ahead and click this icon to copy that into your clipboard. And let me show you where we're going to put that. Back in VS Code in our index.html file, go up into the head section of your page. Now right above, not right below, but right above the line where we have our styles.css file. So right here, just paste in your clipboard and then save this file. Okay, and then the final step back in Google Fonts, if you scroll down a little bit more, it's going to tell you the exact code that you would use for the font family. So you can copy that into your clipboard. And now check this out. Back in our style sheet, for the font family on our button class, just paste it in, and there you have it. Let me increase the width of this. Now we're using the custom font for our buttons. But let's go one step better. We actually, if you look at Figma, we want to use that custom font for everything on the page, right? This headline, this standard text, if you scroll down, all of this pet area text, it should use that font as well. So the way that you can apply this to everything on the page is quite simple. Make sure you have that font family line of Source Sans 3. Make sure you have that in your clipboard so you can copy it or cut it. We can remove it from the Our Button class, and instead, up at the very top, let's just target only our body tag or our body element and just paste that in. And now, because the body element contains all of our content, you can see it's going to be applied to everything. Awesome. And then finally, before we end this call, let's just set our buttons to use semi-bold. So down on the Our Button class, we would say font-weight 600 for semi-bold. Perfect. You can see that's starting to look very similar, very close to the Figma reference design. You can see that just using the right font really goes a long way towards starting to make our design look like the Figma reference. In our next call, let's fine-tune the font sizes of these different elements and also the margin or spacing around them. That will really start to make things look like our reference design file. I'll see you then. Hey, welcome back. Let's pick up right where we left off. So here in VS Code, let me jump into my index.html file. And then remember, we can click this icon to open up the live preview area. Cool. I can close down my File Explorer sidebar by pressing Ctrl or Command B. Awesome. So to get started, let's add the appropriate font size for this heading level 1. So in Figma, up until this call, we would normally find that by, double clicking on this element. And then in the right-hand sidebar, you can see, oh, it's using this font, it's bold, it's using a size of 100 pixels, so on and so forth. However, right now I want to show you a tool in Figma that I probably should have showed you a couple of calls ago. However, Figma just added this to their application a couple of months ago. So in other words, until about 60 days ago, this wasn't even an option. However, in this top right corner area, see this area to the right of the share button? It looks like the HTML tag with the /. If you hover over it, it says Dev Mode. Go ahead and click that on or toggle that on and check this out. Now when you click on different elements in the Figma design, this right-hand sidebar, if you scroll down a little bit down here, it's going to give you the actual CSS properties. Like for example, if you click on the View Pets button and then scroll down, it's giving you the padding values, it's giving you the background color and the border radius, so on and so forth. Now you can toggle this on and off. The idea is that when it's off, this is just regular Figma mode, and this is how graphic designers use the application. But since you and I are developers, we can toggle this on, and now over in this right-hand sidebar, instead of making changes, right, like with this button view pets selected, if I tried to click on this color down here, it doesn't offer me a color picker to choose a different color. Instead, it just copies this color code to my clipboard. So in other words, now the entire workflow of this right-hand sidebar in Figma is well suited for us as developers. Cool. So you can always toggle this off and on. In dev mode now, let's get the font size for this big heading level 1. So in the sidebar, I can see, cool, font size 100 pixels. Now you absolutely could just copy and paste this line right into VS Code. However, it's the industry standard to not use pixels as your unit of measurement for font sizes, and you should instead use rem or REM. This has to do with if someone comes to your website and they need the fonts to be larger for their eyesight to comfortably read the fonts, rem just scales a bit more flexibly than pixels. So you might be wondering, how do you convert px or pixels into rem? Simple. You just divide pixels by 16. Let me explain. So let's go into our CSS file, right? So our styles.css. And let's create a new rule for our top section H1. So it doesn't matter exactly where, but maybe just right below our top section rule right here, I'll say .top dash section, and then a space, and then we can say H1. So this is called a descendant selector. Essentially, we're saying, look inside this element or any element that has a class of top section. Look inside it, that's what the space means. Look inside it for any heading level 1s, and then that's what we're going to apply. So you could say font dash size 100 pixels. However, we want to use rem. So how do you convert, this 100 pixels into rem? Open up your calculator and just take your pixel value and then divide it by 16. Cool. So you can see that gives me 6.25 rem. So 6.25 rem. Awesome. Let's also remove the margin around this. So let's set the margin to 0. And then our line height is way too large. So line height is also, in journalism, I believe they refer to it as leading or leading. Hey, don't get mad at me if I don't pronounce words perfectly. I'm a developer, not a designer. But line height has to do with the spacing in between multiple lines of text within the same element, right? So if we look in Figma, you can see that with this element selected, it should have a line height of 97.3%. So you can just copy that into your clipboard and just paste that in. Cool. Now I'm on a small screen, so this preview window in VS Code is not wide enough for my liking. So what you can actually do is click these 3 dots or these 3 lines over here and click Open in Browser. That will open up the same VS Code live preview URL, but in your actual web browser. So now I have a bit more space to preview things. Cool. Let's go ahead and set up the font size for this text. So back in Figma, if you just click on it, in the right-hand side, you can see that it should have a font size of 20 pixels. So I would just get out my calculator, 20 divided by 16, so 1.25 rem. So here's what I would do. I would just create a new rule and say .top dash section, look inside it, so a space for any and all paragraphs, say font size 1.25 rem. In this case, I believe the line height or leading is too small, right? There should be a little bit more space in between the multiple lines of text. So if you look in Figma, you can see that its line height should be, 169.3%. Or that's what the graphic designer for this design chose. And it looks pretty nice, I think. So I would just copy and paste that, right? Beautiful. Okay, next up, let's set the font size for our buttons. So back in Figma, just click on one of the buttons. Cool, you should see that their font size is 18 pixels. So in my calculator, that's just slightly larger than 1 rem. So 1 rem is the default, right? 16. So 18 divided by 16 is, 1.125. So I would just find our button and give it a new property, font dash size 1.125 rem. Beautiful. Now, the next thing I think we should fix is the vertical spacing that should exist above and below our 2 buttons. So if we look at our Figma reference design, Why don't we start by giving our paragraph a bit of vertical margin so that can create the common spacing above the paragraph, but also in between the paragraph and the buttons. So I would just go into my CSS. We have this rule for our top section P, and let's just say margin 1 rem and then 0. So this will be used for the top and bottom, and then this will be used for the left and right. Now don't worry, at the end of this call, we'll jump on a quick experiment in CodePen so I can truly show you the difference between margin and padding. We'll finally cover that once and for all. However, you might notice right now that yes, that created the padding in between, or excuse me, the margin or spacing in between the paragraph and above the paragraph, but what about the margin below the paragraph? Well, that's because these A elements, anchors or links by default are inline elements instead of block level elements. Again, don't worry, we'll cover that at the end of this call in a CodePen experiment. Basically, in order to get this paragraph to be able to actually push down so it has bottom margin, it needs something to push against. And because A elements are inline elements by default, you can't really push against an inline element. So to fix this, we would just target our buttons and just make them inline block so that the paragraph can actually push against them. So in our button rule, let's just say display inline dash block. Whoops, helps if you spell display correctly. Display. Perfect, now you can see the paragraph actually creates a bit of its own bottom margin before the buttons. Don't worry, at the end of this call, I will explain what in the world display inline block means and what inline elements and block level elements even are. Cool. Next, let's add a bunch of spacing or margin below the buttons. Right? Because if you look at the Figma design, there should be a lot of spacing below the buttons before our 4 columns, these callouts begin. So to find out how much space we should give, let's just click on maybe View Pets button and then hold down the Alt or Option key on your keyboard. So Alt on Windows, Option on Mac, and then I would hover over this first column here, this one that says Sunny Play, just hover over its border while holding down Alt, like this, and you can see that value right there, 129 in red, so that's the pixel value that we would want to use, 129 pixels. So here's what I would do. Instead of applying that directly to these buttons, I would create a wrapper div around the buttons. My reasoning for that is we might want to use this button class elsewhere on our website. And my point is it's not like you would always want to add a ton of bottom margin to every single instance of a button. Right? Oftentimes you'll want to use a button without giving it a bunch of bottom margin. So here's what I would do. In our HTML, I would just find those 2 A elements, the 2 buttons, the 2 links, and wrap them in a div. So opening div here, we don't need the closing here. We need it below the 2 A elements, just like this. And now to fix the indentation automatically, just hit Control or Command S to save. Beautiful. And then let's give the opening div a class. So I'll say class equals quotes. Let's just name it like intro-buttons. Okay, then jump in your style sheet and just create a new rule. So we'll say dot intro-buttons, curly brackets. And remember, we're going to say margin bottom. We got the value from Figma. It was 129 pixels. Cool. Let me view that on a big screen. Awesome. So now it's really starting to take shape. This is where those 4 columns will go. One last thing before we jump into our CodePen experiment is let's set a maximum width on the heading level 1 and on the paragraph because they should wrap. If you look at our Figma design, the designer strategically chose to wrap this text after the word your. Like there's some vertical rhythm or balance in the find your and then new bestie. And then also with this paragraph text, right? It should break after the word your. It shouldn't just, if we look at the browser, use up the entire screen width. The human eye shouldn't have to scan all the way to the right edge. So to fix that, I would just add a bit of max width value. So on the heading level 1, I would say, max dash width of, say like 525 pixels. And then on the paragraph, I would say the top section P, I would say like max width 435 pixels. If we look at that in the big screen, awesome. If you're wondering how I knew those number values, it's just because I took a sneak peek at the Figma design before you and I hopped on this call. However, if you look in Figma with developer mode enabled, and you just click on the heading level 1, and then scroll down a little bit over here, you can see width, 525 pixels. I'm using max width instead of width because I want this to work on tiny smartphone screens. Anytime you set a width value instead of a max width value, you would create an awkward horizontal scroll bar situation on a tiny smartphone. So width forces something to be exactly that width. Max width says, hey, this is the widest it can be, but it can squish down to be narrower on a narrower screen. Cool, and then if you click on the paragraph, scroll down, you can see width 435. Awesome. At this point, let's jump into CodePen. So in a new browser tab, I want you to open up CodePen, and I want to once and for all show you the difference between margin, padding, what's a block level element, what's an inline level element, so on and so forth. So from CodePen, just go ahead and click Start Coding, or if you want to, you can just watch. You don't need to type this out. But let's do this. Let's have a heading level 1 that says hello, and then let's have a paragraph, and then just type lorem, and then hit Tab for a bit of filler text. Okay, and then maybe below the paragraph, let's have a heading level 2 and say subheading. Cool. Now the easiest way to understand padding and margin is to add borders to every single element on the page. So in the CSS area, if you type asterisk as your selector and then curly brackets, that will apply to every single element on the page. So do this with me. Say border, and let's go with like 3 pixels solid black, semicolon. Cool. So let's focus on our heading level 1 to understand the difference between padding and margin. Notice how there's a border around the heading level 1. So padding, let's first of all select the heading level 1. Padding, if we say padding, 20 pixels, that is the space inside of its border, inside of an element's border. And even if you don't have a border, there's still that space where the border would be. So you have the content itself, then the padding is the space around the content, then you have the border, and then margin is the space around the border. Now by default, headings and paragraphs and many other elements have a little bit of margin, even if you don't give it any. So notice how there's space in between our headings and our paragraphs. If we went in this asterisk selector and said everything should have margin 0, watch this. Everything fully collapses, right? So now there's no space in between the elements. So if we wanted to create margin below the heading, we have our heading level 1. You could say like margin bottom 20 pixels. So it creates space outside of the border edge of the element. So it goes padding, then border, then margin. Cool. Now let's also cover the difference between what is a block level element and an inline level element and what is an inline block. So first of all, an example of a block element is a heading level 1 or a paragraph or a div. So let's take our heading level 1. A block level element just means that by default, it is going to expand to take up the full entire width of the container. It's going to use up all of the available horizontal space. It's also going to drop down to its own new line. So if that doesn't make sense, let me show you the opposite of that, which is an inline level element. So for example, in our paragraph of text, what if we wanted the word ipsum to be bold? You can wrap it in a strong tag or strong element like this. So opening strong tag, closing strong tag. Cool. So you can see the word ipsum is bold and it has a little bit of border around it because we use the asterisk selector. But notice, because it's an inline level element, it doesn't drop down to its own new line, right? It sits in the flow of text, in the flow of the paragraph. It sort of shrink wraps around itself and it sits in line. However, check this out. If we target our strong element and say that it should be display block, watch what happens. All of a sudden, it forces itself to take up the entire available width and it forces itself to sit on its own line. So there can only be, by default, one block level element per line in the browser. Now, obviously there's ways to get creative and get around that, but I'm just saying by default, without giving it any other properties, that's what's going to happen. Okay, so that's inline and block, but what about inline dash block? So for example, on our strong tag, what if you get rid of that property? So it's just inline. Cool, that's what you would expect. However, what if you give it a background color of yellow? Simple enough, but what if we gave it padding of 10 pixels? Notice this awkward situation where now the content around it isn't respecting its vertical flow. Like the paragraph that it's sitting in is not expanding above, and then even the text, the second line of text is not pushing down to make up for the room of that vertical padding on the inline level element. However, watch this. If we say display, instead of inline, which is the default value, if we say inline block, you can see that it's sort of a hybrid between inline and block, as you might have guessed by its name. So it still sits in the flow of the text. It doesn't drop down to its entirely new line. It doesn't try to take up the full width of the screen, but it does sort of honor its own vertical spacing, and the content around it honors its vertical spacing. So it's still inline the flow of the content. However, the content is aware of its vertical dimensions. Anyways, let's not get too academic. You don't need to study or memorize this right now. We will run into these properties again and again and again as we finish building out our Figma design. For now, I wouldn't sweat the details. I'll see you very soon. Hey, thanks for hopping back on the call. Let's jump right back into the action. So here I am looking at the Figma reference design. We've more or less completed this content, and for now I want to focus on these 4 columns. So let me zoom in a little bit so you can see the styling. You can see they have a subtle semi-transparent white border, but most importantly, if you zoom out, you can see all 4 of them sit on a single row, side by side. Now, at the end of our last call, we talked about how display block level elements take up the full width, the full available width. So how in the world can we get multiple things to sit on the same row like this? How is this possible? Well, first let's set up a little bit of basic HTML with different divs, and then I'll show you the CSS to make this multiple column layout possible. So let me jump into VS Code. If you don't already have your preview open, remember you can open up your index.html file and then click this icon to view the preview. My screen's a bit small, so let me hide that for the moment, but here's what we're going to do. Let's add a bit of HTML. So you can see we have this heading level 3 that says 4 callout area, so this is where the 4 columns are going to live. So let's get rid of that heading level 3, and in its place, let's add a div, so div, and then hit tab on your keyboard. And before we worry about copying over the exact icons and text from Figma, let's first just set up 4 columns, a 4-column layout. So let's start with just a bit of filler content to begin with. So in this div, maybe let's have a paragraph, so P and then hit tab, and then inside the paragraph type lorem, so L-O-R-E-M, and then hit tab, and that will give you some filler text. Now, on the opening div tag, let's give it a class of, so class equals, and let's call it like intro-feature. Cool. So we have one of those, right? If you save that and look at your preview, there is one div with a class of intro feature. Now what I want you to do is just duplicate this and copy and paste it so that we have 4 of them, right? We want a 4-column layout. So just take that div, copy it into your clipboard. So with it selected, Control-C or Command-C, and then paste it in. So Control or Command-V. So there's 2, there's 3, there's 4. Go ahead and hit save. And then if you check your preview, cool. So there's the first one, there's the second one, third, and fourth. Now the first thing I'm noticing is that we accidentally applied the maximum width from this paragraph to these paragraphs, and we don't want that, right? These paragraphs should take up the full width of their divs. I realize that might be confusing because we're trying to set up a 4-column layout, but trust me, we don't need these paragraphs to be a certain width. So what I would do is just go adjust this paragraph so that it has a class that receives that maximum width. Let me show you what I mean. So back in our HTML, we have our heading level 1, right? Find your new bestie. And then this is the text that we do want to have that max width. So I would probably give it a class, and I would just make it up. So like class of intro-text. Save that, and then I would open up my CSS file, and then I would find the selector that was targeting that paragraph. So here we go. Right? Top section, so any paragraphs inside the top section, that's not what this should be. Instead, I would just change the selector to dot, and we named it intro-text. So you can save that. Beautiful. So that's still receiving the max width, but now our paragraphs, these, they're not getting the extra large font size, and they're taking up the full width of their divs. Now, in order to illustrate that the div is taking up the full available width, let's give it a border. So if we look at our Figma reference design, you zoom in, you can see that each one of these, if you hover over the border and click on it, and then in the right-hand column, we can see the style border 1 pixel solid, and then instead of a hashtag or a pound sign and then a 6-digit color code, this RGBA color code, this is how you can have transparent colors. Let me explain. We can spell this code out together. So if we go down in our CSS, let's go down to the very bottom and create a brand new rule for our 4 columns, right? We named them to have a class of intro feature. So I would say dot intro feature, and then let's just say border 1 pixel, so 1px solid. And now when you want a color to be transparent, you can say RGBA parentheses and then end this line with a semicolon. RGBA stands for red, green, blue, and then alpha, alpha meaning transparency. So we're going to give in these parentheses 4 values. So the first is the red value. So if we want white, we just max out the value. Now the value can be anywhere between 0 and 255. So to create white, you just max out all colors, right? Red should be maxed out, green should be maxed out, blue should be maxed out, comma, and then the final value is how transparent or opaque it should be. So if you give it a value of 1, that will be fully visible. If you give it a value of 0, that's fully invisible. So like 0.5 is halfway see-through, like halfway visible. And if you looked in Figma, you could see that its value is 0.24. So we can go ahead and save that and check it out in the browser. So you can see the faint border. Now, as we learned at the end of our last call, right, a block level element takes up the full available width. So now back to the actual question at hand that's meaningful here. How do you create a multiple column layout? If we look at our Figma reference design and we zoom out, how do we get all 4 divs to sit on a single row like this? Well, it's actually a lot easier than it used to be 5 or 10 or 15 years ago. So in the current web design world, let me show you how we do this. We just need to wrap back in our HTML, we need to wrap these 4 divs so that they have a parent or sort of container or wrapper element. So before the very first intro feature, so right here, I'm going to have an opening div tag. Now we do not need the matching closing div tag right here, so you can delete that. On the opening div tag, let's give it a unique class. So let's say class equal, why don't we call it like intro dash features as in plural. So the plural name, it houses the multiple individuals. And then we just need to go add the matching closing tag. So at the end of the 4th and final div, so after this, so right here, just add in a closing div. And now if you hit save, that'll automatically fix the indentation. But essentially we've nested 4 of these inside the overall parent or wrapper named intro features plural. Now check this out. That alone doesn't do anything, right? There's still just a single column layout. However, now if we go into our style sheet, we can target that parent element. So we can say dot intro dash features plural. And now here's what's really cool. In the modern world of web development, we can just say display grid. Grid is my favorite technique for creating multiple column layouts. Now, here's the fun part. If we say grid template columns, and there's dashes in between those words, so grid template columns, colon, and now check this out. Type this in as the value. 1FR and then a space, 1FR, space, 1FR, 1FR, semicolon. I'll explain what in the world this means in just a moment. But before we test this out, let's add one more property, and let's say column gap, and give it a value of 16 pixels. So that's all we need. If we go ahead and save that, or just look at your live preview, perfect. Now, let's go back and actually explain what in the world that 1FR, 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 1FR means. So this is our way of saying we want 4 columns, right? First column, second column, third column, fourth column. What if you only wanted a 2-column layout? Well, you could just say 1FR space 1FR. Cool. Now, what in the world does 1FR mean? Let me put that back to all 4. FR is a unit of measurement that means a fraction unit. In other words, it's a way of equally dividing up the width. So we're saying that all 4 columns should be equal width. Now, if you wanted one of them to take up twice as much space as all of the others, for the first one, you could say it should be 2 fraction units. So it's going to be twice the width, right? If you look at the preview, this is exactly twice the width of these other ones. And then what if you wanted the 4th column to also take up, like 1.5 fraction units? As you can see now, it's 1.5 times larger than these equal width ones. So you could get creative. You could have a 2-column layout, a 3-column layout, a 5 or 10-column layout. It's up to you, but we would just want all 4 of these to be even, right? So 1FR, 1FR. for all four. And then column gap, this is how you create the spacing in between our columns. Cool. Now, until relatively recently, web browsers did not have this display grid feature. So this is a very powerful modern feature, and we are very lucky to have this at our disposal. Right now, you might be thinking, but hey, what about on a smaller screen like a smartphone, right? It's too narrow to comfortably fit 4 columns. Well, that's a great point. Don't worry. A little bit later on in another call, we can learn how to serve up different layouts to different screen sizes. But for now, let's not worry about that. Let's learn how to walk before we learn how to run. Don't worry, I promise we will make sure that our layout works perfectly, even on a tiny, narrow smartphone. For now, though, let's optimize the size of this text, but more importantly, the padding for each one of these 4-column boxes. Right? The text should not sit up flush against the border like this. So if we look at our Figma reference design, let me zoom in on one of these. What I would do to see how much padding this is, and how much padding should be up here, I would just click on one of these paragraphs, and then hold down the Alt key on Windows or the Option key on Mac, and then just hover over the actual semi-transparent border box like this, and right below my cursor you can see the number 25. So we need 25 pixels of horizontal padding. And then how much vertical padding? I'd probably just click on this icon and then hold down the Alt or Option key and then hover over the transparent border. So 33, you can see to the left of my cursor, 33 pixels. So here's what I would do. We have our intro feature singular, not plural, the singular one with the border. I would say, padding. And so that was 33 pixels vertically and 25 pixels horizontally. And then I would probably target the paragraphs inside of that. So dot in a new rule, intro, feature, space, p, curly brackets. And let's just zero out its margins. And then let's optimize the font size. So if you look at Figma and click on this, small paragraph, standard paragraph text, and then you scroll down on the right-hand side, you can see font size should be 17 pixels. Now you could calculate that into rem using your calculator, or check this out. See where it says code in Figma? And then I can click these, it looks like a settings icon. If you click that, you can change this to REM, and then that will tell you, right, font size should be 1. It looks like 0625 rem. So I'd probably just copy that into my clipboard. It's just personal preference, but I'm going to actually leave this in Figma set to pixels because the only thing that I like to measure in rem is font size. But you get the idea. I do like font size to be in rem. So then I would just say here, font size, and then just paste it in, 1.0625 rem, semicolon. Let's see what this looks like. Cool, it's already taking shape. So now we have our 4 columns, the semi-transparent border, we have a little bit of padding for the content inside. This is really starting to look like our reference design. I need to run for now. I know this was a quick call, but in our next call, let's go ahead and start adding in these icons. So we'll learn how to include vector graphics or icons into our web page. We'll set up this headline, so on and so forth. And then very soon we're going to get to the fun part of adding in these gradients, right? So we have this radial or circle purple gradient on the right hand side, and then a blue one up towards the top. That's really going to make this top section come to life. Awesome. Let's keep our momentum rolling, and I will see you in another call very soon. Hey, thanks for hopping back on the call. Let's jump right back into the action. So here's the page we've been coding, and we have this 4-column area. Let's look at our reference design for that area. Cool. So let's learn how to add these icons to each one of our 4 columns. Let's start with the first column, so this sun. If you click on that icon, and then scroll down to the very bottom of this right-hand column in Figma, now this lets you decide which type of file format you're trying to export this graphic as. So if it was a photograph, you would want JPEG or WebP, but if it's an icon, meaning it's made up of simplistic vector shapes that can scale infinitely, then you would indeed want SVG. That stands for Scalable Vector Graphics. So that's what we want. You can just click Export Sun. It's going to save that into your computer's downloads folder. Now, if this was a JPEG or just an actual photograph, you would need to move this into our website's folder and reference the file. However, an SVG file is special. It actually just contains simple code. So what you can do is just open this file up in VS Code. Just drag this Sun1 SVG that we just downloaded, open it up, drag it on top of your VS Code program. Awesome, so you can see it's just 10 lines of code. And this is HTML. You can literally just copy and paste this anywhere in your HTML file. So just select it all. So Controller Command A, and then Controller Command C to copy it into your clipboard. And then in our HTML file for this first intro feature, right above the paragraph, so right here where my cursor is, just paste it in. Controller Command V. Let's go check our preview of our page. Perfect. Now, for the other 3 icons, I'll let you know that you absolutely could go into Figma, like click on this one, and then click export, and export these other 2 icons as well. However, if you're ever working on another design after this Figma project, you might be wondering, hey, where are these icons coming from? Because I can let you know that the graphic designer at our company, they did not design these icons themselves. Instead, there's this website, so you might have heard of Bootstrap before. If you haven't heard of it, that's okay. But there's this subsection of the site just for reusable free icons. So it's icons.getbootstrap.com. From this page, if you scroll down a little bit, you can see that there are hundreds, maybe if not thousands of different icons, and they are completely royalty free. You can use these on any project. So for example, if I wanted this one of the car, you just click on it, and then over in the right-hand area, if you scroll down to the very bottom, you'll see copy HTML, and there you go. It's just an SVG element, a scalable vector graphic element. You just copy and paste that right into your HTML. Cool. So I just wanted you to be aware of where those icons are coming from, but for now, I think it's just as fast to just export these instead of having to search for them on that website. So I would just click on this smiley face or this emoji face, and then click export that down here in the bottom right corner. And then I would open that file up. Here it is in my downloads folder. Just open that up with VS Code so we can actually access the content. Controller Command A to select it all, C to copy it into your clipboard back in our index.html. Here's the second div with the class of intro feature. So right inside that div, but above the paragraph, just paste it in. If we look at our preview, perfect. Let's go get the third icon. So back in Figma, click on this trophy, export it down here. Let's go open that up in VS Code. Here it is, trophy. Drag that on top of the VS Code program. Just select all of that, copy it into my clipboard. Here's the third div with the class of intro feature, paste it in. Check out our preview. Beautiful. Let's do the fourth and final icon. So in Figma, the moon with the stars. Scroll down to the right-hand side. Looks like the export area collapsed somehow, but I'll just click the plus symbol. Cool. I'm not sure why, but you can see it changed to PNG. I don't want that. I want it to be an SVG. So with the moon selected, I'll change this to SVG. Cool. And now I can just click export moonstars 1. Go into my downloads folder. There it is. Open that up with VS Code. Just copy this into my clipboard. Scroll down. Right above this final paragraph in the final div, just paste it in. Cool. So that gives us this. Next, let's add the subheadings that sit below each icon. So if we look back at our Figma reference design, I would want to add this headline that says Sunny Play. So you can just click on that. Now you could type that in, Sunny Play, but let me show you a cool feature about Figma Dev Mode. With that heading selected, in this right-hand menu at the very top, if you just click on this text right here where it says Sunny Play, that just clicking on it copies it into your clipboard. So then back in VS Code, let's go find the first div that has a class of intro feature. So for me, it's around line number 25. Here's the SVG. So just find the bottom of the SVG. So right here above the paragraph, but below the SVG, just paste in your clipboard. Whoops, we would actually want a heading level 2, right? So H2, hit tab, paste in your clipboard. I'm going to save to fix the indentation. Perfect. If we look at our preview, cool. Now we can fix the font size and the margins in just a moment, but let's get the actual text in place. So instead of this lorem placeholder, let's go grab the paragraph text for that first column. So in Figma, just click on this standard text, and then you can click on it right up here in the top right corner to copy it into your clipboard. Back in VS Code, let's just replace this standard placeholder paragraph text. So from here to here, just empty out the P element, paste in your clipboard. Aha, you can see VS Code is highlighting this apostrophe with yellow. This is because in HTML, this is not a safe character. So where you see in this text, our center is located in beautiful Miami, comma, and it's currently, this apostrophe in the word it's, delete that apostrophe, and in its place, I want you to say the ampersand or and symbol, and then RSQUO, and then a semicolon. So ampersand RSQUO semicolon. This is the safe encoded HTML character that is the right single quote. So you can save that. You don't need to save it, but if you look at your live preview, perfect. There it is. Let's go do the same thing for this second, third, and fourth columns. So let's go grab this heading level 2. So in Figma, let's grab this text. Dedicated staff, you can click on it. Just click right here to copy that into your clipboard. Back in VS Code, here's our second div with a class of intro feature. Below the SVG, let's say H2, hit tab, paste it in. Let's go grab the standard paragraph text. So click on this text right here, click here to copy it, go back into VS Code, empty out this paragraph. In its place, paste it in. Cool, that gives us this. Let's go do the third column. So I'll grab this, copy it into my clipboard. Let me close this plugin notice. Cool, click on this to copy it. Look for the third div. So here it is in between the SVG and the paragraph. H2, hit tab, paste it in. Let's go grab this third paragraph text, just copy that into my clipboard. Empty out this paragraph. Again, we can see this apostrophe, so we want to delete that and say ampersand RSQUO semicolon. If we take a look in the browser, beautiful. Let's do the fourth and final column. So in Figma, nightly yoga, let's copy that into our clipboard. Let's find that fourth div. Here it is, in between the last SVG and paragraph, just say H2, hit tab, paste it in. Let's grab that standard paragraph text right here, copy that into our clipboard, empty out this paragraph, and paste it in. Let's take a look. Awesome. Let me zoom out a little bit. This is what it would look like on a standard monitor. And this is really starting to look like the Figma reference design. Next, let's make sure the font size, font weight, and margin surrounding this heading level 2 matches the reference design. So in Figma, I would just click on one of these headings like Sunny Play. In the right-hand sidebar, I can see that font weight is 700, and that's just a standard bold. If it was 600, that's a semi-bold. Now, a heading level 2 is bold by default, or it has a font weight of 700 by default, so we don't even need to set that. However, let's make sure that the size is correct. So 24 pixels. In terms of rem, I like my font sizes in rem, so I would just say 24 divided by 16. That gives us 1.5 rem. So let's go set that. So in our CSS, if you're anything like me, instead of scrolling through this file, you might just want to search. So you can press Control F on Windows or Command F on Mac, and then just search for intro-feature. Beautiful. So maybe right below this rule, I would just create a brand new rule and say .intro feature, look inside it for any heading level 2s, and then I would say font size 1.5 rem semicolon. Let's see what that looks like in the browser. Cool. I'm noticing though, compared to the Figma reference design, I think there's supposed to be more space in between the icon and the heading and less space below the heading in this standard text, right? So if you look at Figma, yes, you can see there's a much larger gap above the headline. So I'd probably just click on this Sunny Play, hold down the Alt key on Windows or the Option key on Mac, hover over this icon. Figma is claiming that's 44 pixels of a gap, but I feel like that number's too big, but let's just see what it looks like. And then you can see in terms of bottom margin, looks like only 7, but with line height coming into play, I think we probably only need about like 3 or 4 or 5 pixels of bottom margin. So let's do this. On our heading level 2, let's say margin. And now I want to show you a trick. We've seen that you can use like one number as your vertical and then the second number as your horizontal. You can actually provide 4 values for top, right, bottom, left. So it goes in it's like a clockwise fashion. So the first value, if you give it 4 values, is your top margin. Let's see what 44 looks like. And then your second value would be like a clock hand on a clock. So then it would be the right margin right. We don't need any margin right. Margin bottom, let's say like maybe 3 or 4 pixels. Let's say just 3 pixels. And then it would be the left margin. We don't need any. And then just semicolon. So just like a clock, top, right, bottom, left. Let's see what this looks like. See, I think that's too much space in between the icon and the heading. So let's actually lower this to maybe like 25. So if we compare that to the Figma reference design, maybe it's somewhere in between. Let's try like 31. Cool. I think that's starting to match very nicely. I'm very happy with this. Now, really quick, before we hop off this call, there's one tiny detail that has nothing to do with our 4 columns, and it has to do with these buttons. So if you zoom in really, really close, you can see that this button is ever so slightly taller than this button. And it's because this button has a border, whereas this one doesn't. So to make these the exact same height, I'd probably just give this button a border that matches this exact background color. So really quick, this has nothing to do with the 4 columns, but if you search for our-btn, right, so this is our main purple button, maybe right below this background color, I would just say border, 2 pixels solid, and then I would just reuse this color, its background color, and then semicolon. You can give that a save. And now you can see they are the exact same height. Perfect. Let me zoom out so we can admire our work, our progress so far. This is really starting to look like the reference design. I have to jump off the call for now, but in our next call, let's finally add the fun part. Let's finally add these radial gradients, this purple and this blue. That's really gonna finish this top area. I think we will have done a perfect job. And then after that, we can tackle this pet area. Awesome. I'll see you very soon. Hey, thanks for jumping on the call. This is going to be really quick. There's just a tip that I wanted to share with you. So Figma recently added the dev mode, and until about 60 days ago, there was no such thing as dev mode. So I wanted to share a tip with you that I just learned about very recently. When it comes to exporting our SVG icons, so for example, like let me click on this sun icon. Remember, for exporting this or accessing the SVG code, we were clicking export down at the bottom and then opening up that file with VS Code. But with dev mode, check this out. Assuming you have dev mode enabled, with that icon clicked, if you scroll down just a little bit in this right-hand column, like maybe halfway down, you'll see this SVG area. And yes, you can copy this code into your clipboard directly. So you can select it, or there's even a button right here, if you hover over it, that says copy, and it's that easy. It's now in my clipboard, and you can paste that directly into your HTML instead of having to download a file and open it up. Cool. That's just a really quick tip. Until a couple of months ago, this feature didn't even exist in Figma, so I just wanted you to be aware of this. Awesome. I'll see you on another call very soon. Hey, I'm extra excited for today's call because we're going to be working on a very fun feature. So here's our web page, but if you look at our Figma reference design, we're finally going to add this splash of purple color here and this splash of blue color here. Let's actually start with this purple circle on the right-hand side. So if I click right about here on that purple blurred circle in Figma, you can see on the left-hand side that selects this area called background circles, and inside that there's a layer called ellipse 2 and ellipse 1. So let's start with the purple one so you can see that it's ellipse 1. So with that specifically selected, you can see it's selecting this circle right here. And first of all, let's take a look at how tall and how wide it is. So it's width and height. So you can see right here it says 617 by 617. But if you want to scroll down, let me toggle on dev mode again. So again, with ellipse 1 selected, with dev mode enabled, if you scroll down on the right-hand side, you can see width 617, height 617. So let's just start adding this to our HTML and CSS, right? This is the page we currently have. So how would we add it over here? Well, before we worry about the placement of it, let's first just create a blurred circle of that size. Let me show you what I have in mind. Let's go into our HTML and let's scroll down to the bottom. So here's the paragraph for that fourth and final column of the 4-column area, and then down here we see 4 closing divs. Now this can be really confusing when there's this many nested divs and you're wondering where should I place that blurred purple circle. So let's go through this one by one. So this is the fourth and final column that's closing. This is the wrapper for all 4 columns. This is that max width center div, and then this is the overall dark blue background area of the entire area. So in other words, this is the 4th column, this is the wrapper for all 4 columns. So right below these 2 closing divs, but before these 2 closing divs, this is where I would want to add that purple circle that's blurred. So right about here, let's do this. Say div, hit tab, and let's give it a class. So on the opening tag, let's give it a class of like circle. It doesn't matter, just I'm making this up. And we don't need any content in the div. It can be empty. Let's go ahead and save that, or actually with your live preview, you don't even need to save. But then let's go into our style sheet, our styles.css file. And down at the very bottom, let's create a rule. So dot, we gave it a class of circle. So dot circle, curly brackets. And let's do this. Let's say width. Figma told us it's 617 pixels, semicolon, height, 617 px, and then we just need to give it a background color. So in Figma, you can see here it is. It's spelled out background and then that exact hexadecimal color code. So you can just copy that entire background line. So Control or Command C with it selected, paste it in right here. Now that is the perfect color code. However, I can let you know that in Figma, that circle is not fully visible. It's slightly invisible, right? Like it's slightly transparent. The opacity is not 100%. So in Figma, if we click on this in the left-hand layer menu, so ellipse 1, that's the purple circle, right? Well, background circles contains both of those blurred circles. And if you click on it, and then if we exit out of dev mode, you don't need to dig through this and find this, but I'm just trying to let you know that the layer that has both of these blurred circles, its opacity is set to 85%. So it's slightly see-through, right? Otherwise, the blue and the purple might look a bit too obvious. So all I'm trying to let you know is that in the CSS, after the perfect background color, I would also say opacity. And now if you give it a value of 1, it's fully visible. If you give it a value of 0, it's fully invisible. So 85, we would just want to say 0.85. Let's see what this looks like in the browser. So we don't see anything, but if we scroll down, aha. Let me zoom out quite a bit so you can kind of see as a whole what's happening here. So that is the exact size, it's the exact color. Now we just need to turn it into a circle instead of a square, and then we need to blur it. So to turn it into a circle, we simply say border radius, and then you could try to give it a value that's exactly half of 617. You could open up your calculator, but instead we could just say 50%, semicolon. If you check it out in the browser, aha. Now we just need to make it blurred instead of this perfect awkward circle. Now if you look in Figma, we can cheat a little bit here. We don't need to go research on the internet how to blur something with CSS. You can actually just look in Figma in dev mode. So let me make sure dev mode's on. In background circles, let me select the ellipse 1, that purple element. And then down in this right-hand area, you can see filter : blur 150 pixels. So literally just select that and copy that into your clipboard. And then let's just paste it in right here. So we're giving it a filter blur of 150 pixels. Aha, this looks really good. So now it's just a matter of placement. Instead of having it sit as if it's a real piece of content below our 4 columns, we instead want to sort of float it or, like magically push it into the background and have it sit right about here. So how in the world would we accomplish that? There are a couple of different ways that we could do that with CSS, but I think the simplest is to use something called absolute positioning. What in the world is absolute positioning? Let me show you. Let's edit the CSS for our purple circle. So here we are, and just add a new property of position : and the value is absolute semicolon. Now, with this in place, we can say, like for example, what if we wanted to position it in the very top left corner? You can say top 0 and then left 0. If we look in the browser, aha. So now it's sitting in the very top left corner. What if we wanted it to sit in the very top right corner? You could just, instead of left, you could change this to top 0, right 0. Cool. Now, what if you wanted it to sit, for example, like 100 pixels in from the right edge? Well, instead of right 0, you could say like right 100 px. So now it's going to come off of the very right edge 100 pixels, in this direction. Right? Or if you made that a really big value like 500 pixels, you get the idea. It's pushed in 500 pixels from the right edge. Now, let me zoom out even further just to make a point here. So if we put that back to right 0, right? So it's going to be the very top right corner. We actually don't want it to be in the top right corner of the browser window as a whole, right? If you look at the Figma reference design, we want it to be in relation to this sort of max width center area, right? So just how this content, right, the Find Your New Bestie, all of our content is centered in, this portion of the screen, we would want our circle to be absolutely positioned in reference to it. So for example, like if we said right 0, what if we wanted it to be aligned to this right edge right here? What I'm getting at here is, what if someone was on a 50-inch big desktop monitor? You wouldn't want this splash of purple color so far off onto the right edge that someone barely, like they don't even notice it. We want it to sort of be positioned right about here on our main design area. So the way that absolute positioning works is it's always in reference to its nearest ancestor that is positioned relatively. Now by default, if you don't tell any elements on your page to use position relative, it's going to use sort of the browser window as a whole as its frame of reference for your absolute positioning. However, if we want this, max width center area to be our point of reference, check this out. We just go into our CSS and we named that div, that wrapper max width div. Well, if you just search for max width, remember we named it top section. So on this top section rule where we have max width and margin 0 auto, just add one more property and say position relative. With this in place, now our circle, when we say sit in the very top right corner, it's not in relation to the browser as a whole. Now it's in relation to that center contained element. So in other words, when you position something using absolute positioning, it's going to look for its nearest parent or grandparent or great-grandparent, its nearest ancestor that is using position relative. Awesome. So now that we have that frame of reference, now it's just a matter of, adjusting those top and right values so that it sits in just the right spot. So let's look in Figma. Let me zoom out a little bit. So how far down from the top should we go? Well, if you click on the purple circle and then hold down Alt on Windows or Option on Mac, and then if I hover over this label of homepage design, you can see it looks like it's about 62 pixels. You see that right label, 62 pixels from the top. So I would just change for the circle, the top value. Let's come down 62 pixels from the very top. And then what about the right or horizontal positioning? If you look in Figma, you can see that this right edge, it's not sitting flush against our max width area. Instead, it's actually would be a negative value, right? So it's not like we're just a value of 0. Let me show you the browser. A value of 0 is going to have it so the right edge of the circle sits against this edge. And then if you gave it a value of 100 pixels, it would start right here, right? It would start here and then move this way. If we want it to start beyond the right edge, we can just give it a negative number instead of a positive number. So the way that I would calculate that back in Figma, I'm actually not sure how you could get Figma to tell you how many pixels this is overlapping like this, but I essentially want to measure with the purple circle selected from its right edge until the max width area right here. So what you could do, just toggle out of dev mode. There might be a different way of doing this, but this is just what I would do. So let me select that purple circle. I would just use the rectangle tool up here, and I would just draw my own rectangle, essentially from the right edge of the circle to this max width area against the right edge of the 4 columns. And you can see it looks like it's about, 390 pixels wide. You can actually delete this rectangle. We don't actually need it. You can toggle back into dev mode if you want. But now I know. So the value, instead of right 0, should be negative 390 pixels. If we check that out in the browser, beautiful. At this point, let's go ahead and set up the blue circle that should sit right about here. Actually, before we get to that top left blue circle, I want to point something out. So if I zoom into a normal zoom in, so I'm not simulating a massive screen, you'll notice that we have this awkward horizontal scroll bar, and you can see that, yes, because we told the purple area to sit 390 pixels beyond the right edge, on a small screen that's going to overflow the screen. It's creating this awkward horizontal scrolling. So let me show you what I would do about that. Essentially, I would just tell our overall top dark blue background area to have overflow hidden, so that anything that protrudes beyond its edges is essentially just ignored. That should fix this awkward horizontal scroll area. So back in our CSS, I'm looking for the rule that we wrote for our top section. And actually, not this top section that has a max width, the top section wrapper that has the dark blue background color that's just the full width. So top section wrapper, and I would just give it a property, and it's overflow, so overflow colon hidden semicolon. With that in place, awesome. Now you can see the extra part of this purple circle that would be hanging over the edge just doesn't exist anymore. Awesome. So it looks good on big screens, but even on a smaller screen, it doesn't cause any awkward overflow or horizontal scrolling. Perfect. Now let's actually go ahead and add the top left blue circle. So here's what I would do. In our HTML, we already have the div with a class of circle. Literally just copy and paste and duplicate it, and then give it a class of like circle-2. And then let's go into our style sheet. Let's go find that circle rule down at the very bottom. Just literally duplicate this. So select it all, Control-C to copy it, below it, Control-V or Command-V to paste it in, and change the selector to .circle-2. First of all, let's change the top to 0. We can fill this in just a moment, and then get rid of the right entirely and just say left 0, right, the top left corner. And then let's change its background color. So instead of that purplish pink, it should be blue. So in Figma, click on this area right about here, and then in the right-hand sidebar, if you scroll down, here's that CSS. So we see background, and then it's the exact blue color code. So I would just copy that into my clipboard, and then just replace this line. Perfect. So now it's the correct color. And if we look in the browser, good news and bad news. So the good news is that we see the blue circle. The bad news is that now our circles are overlapping this text content. So we want our circles to sit in the background, right? We don't want it to overlap our 4 callouts or this text. Now, before we learn how to set it to be in the background instead of the foreground, let's first fine-tune the positioning of this blue circle. So let's look in Figma. So how far to the top should it sit? So if you click on the blue circle, from this top edge of the circle to the top edge of the page as a whole, we need to measure how many pixels this is. Now again, the easiest way that I know how to do that would just be to jump out of dev mode, create a rectangle myself, and just draw from the top edge of the circle to the top edge of the design as a whole. And you can see that second number, it looks like, what is that, 365. You don't actually need this rectangle, you could delete it. But for this circle too, I would change the top value to be negative 365 px. Now how far in from the left should it sit? Well, let's look at Figma. Click the circle, so ellipse 2. And now I would just want to measure how far the left edge of the circle sits beyond the left edge of the 4 column, or this max width area right here. So again, I would just draw a rectangle from the edge of the circle, so from right here to this left edge max width area. So it looks like about 123 pixels. I can delete that rectangle. So left, this should be 123 px. Let's check that out in the browser. Whoops, it looks like it's sitting too far in from the left. I just realized that should be a negative number. So negative 123 pixels. Check that out. Perfect. That looks like the reference design. So again, we're using a negative number because if we wanted it to sit flush against the max width area, that would be 0. 100 pixels in from the left edge would come to here. But if we want to go in this direction beyond the edge, that's a negative number. So negative 123 pixels. At this point, the only thing we need to do is tell our splashes of color to sit behind our text content and our 4 columns. So when you use absolute positioning and 2 elements are taking up the same space, there's a property in CSS called z-index, and whichever element has the larger value, it's going to sort of sit on top, in the front, in the foreground. So let's take this heading level 1. You can see how the blue is really overlapping this first line of text. All we would need to do to fix that, if we search for our H1, so top section H1, you could just say like z-index and give it a value of like 5. And then in combination with z-index, you do need to say position relative. So that won't change the positioning, it's just letting z-index be applied. But now if we look at our heading level 1, you can see it's in the front. Right? It's not being overlapped by the blue. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't want to have to go through and target this individually and give it a z-index, this individually our buttons, and the 4 columns. I just want all of this content to have a large enough z-index to sit on top of the circles. So here's what I would do. I would, on that H1, let's get rid of the position relative and the z-index. So now, again, it's sitting in the background instead of the foreground. And I would just create one more wrapper div that houses this content and our 4 columns, but not the 2 circle elements. So here's what I would do, and then give it the z-index. So in our HTML, let's scroll up. So we have top section, and then we have our heading level 1. Inside top section, but before H1, right here, I'm gonna create an opening div. We do not need the matching closing div, but let me give this div a class of like, actual top content. So the idea is that this is the content that should sit in the foreground, not the background. And then where would we want that to end? Just after the 4 columns. So I would scroll down. Okay, so right above the circle divs, right? This is the closing div for the 4th and final column. This is the closing div for all 4 columns, the container for the columns. So then right here, I would just add the closing div for that actual content. If you save, that will fix the indentation. Now, I already forgot the class name we just chose. Okay, we named it actual top content. So then in my CSS, I would just create a new rule. It doesn't matter where, but say dot actual top content. And then I would just say z index. You don't need to give it a very large value. Even a value of 2 would work. Semicolon, and then position relative. If we check that out in the browser, beautiful. Our content is sitting on top of the blue and purple background gradients. At this point, I'm so excited for you because you have now created a web page that looks essentially identical to this Figma reference design. It may not seem like a lot, but trust me, this is a marketable skill. You just used code to create a real-world product. This has tangible real-world value. You can make money doing this. I need to run for today, so I'm going to hop off the call. If you need to, go take a break. Go celebrate this victory. You just built a meaningful section of a web page. Let's celebrate this victory, but we're going to hop on another call very, very soon and continue to build out the rest of this page. I'll see you very soon. Hey, thanks for watching the first 2.5 hours of my brand new ultra premium course. There's still another 19 or almost 20 hours of video lessons to go from here. So you and I just left off with this top section of the site. Up next, we need to learn how to make sure that our page looks good not only on a big laptop or desktop monitor, but also on a tiny, narrow smartphone screen. So we'll learn how to practice what's called mobile first or responsive design so that our sites look great at every screen size. After that, we need to learn about a programming language called JavaScript. We can use JavaScript to make this temperature value here actually be real and dynamic. So we can write code that goes out onto the internet and actually fetches the real current temperature value, and then we can render that text value here on the page. After that, we'll learn how to have our website not only live on our personal private computers, but how to push it or deploy it up to the real public web so that the entire world can view it. In order to do that, we'll need to learn about one of the most important and universal skills in the developer world, something called Git, and the most popular Git service, which is called GitHub. After that, we need to focus on building out this pets listing area down here. And once we have it looking good, then we need to also not have it just be static HTML, but we need to learn how to programmatically create the HTML for these pets on the fly so that they're being generated by a real living, breathing, dynamic data source. After that, we need to learn how to be the ones who are in control of that data source, right? So like, how would we let the owner of the site add new pets, edit existing pets, delete existing pets, upload a photo for each pet, so on and so forth. So to do that, we'll need to learn a little bit about databases. After that, we need to set up a contact form for when someone is interested in a specific pet. So we need to build the front-end user experience, but we also need to program it so that automatically an email notification gets sent to the site owner that, visitor A, B, or C is interested in pet X, Y, or Z. After that, we also need to build a live chat room just for the admin owners of the website so that they can communicate with each other on the website in real time with each other. In order to do that, we're going to need to learn a little bit about React, also a little bit about Next.js, and a service called Pusher. After that, I need your help with a WordPress project where we're going to use a fun modern CSS technology called Tailwind. In that project, we're going to build a blog template and a live search overlay with our HTML, CSS, and JavaScript skills that pulls from real dynamic database WordPress sources. It sounds like a lot, I know, but once we've done all of that together, you will be ready to start applying for web development jobs. You'll have gotten a feel for your own interests, passions, strengths, and weaknesses, and perhaps figured out which area you want to specialize in or, niche down into. And at that point, with some hard work and a bit of luck, you'll be ready to land your first job in the industry. I'm so excited to go on this journey with you, and if you're ready to get started, you can find a link to join the full course down in the description for this video. You'll get immediate and lifetime access to the full 22+ hour course. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you soon. Take care.